So, what are the wildest alien encounters that you've ever imagined? Joe Rogan's podcast doesn't just talk about UFOs. It unpacks mind-blowing accounts that blur the line between science fiction and terrifying reality. From secret government briefings and reversed engineered spacecrafts to guests like Donald Trump and Elon Musk who narrate stories of human contact with aliens. And here are the 16 craziest alien stories ever told on Joe Rogan's show. Kicking off with a fascinating idea shared on episode 2219 on the Joe Rogan Experience. Former President Donald Trump joins Joe for a candid conversation about UFOs, alien life, and the increasing number of unexplained aerial sightings. Trump recalls interviews he had with elite jet pilots, describing them as solid people and great everything, who reported witnessing strange objects during flights. And according to their accounts, these objects weren't meteors or comets. They appeared as round, fast-moving balls that outpaced even the F-22, one of the fastest and most advanced fighter jets in the world.
I interviewed jet pilots that say they saw something. If you saw them, you'd love to have them as your
I've had
son.
a couple in here. Commander David Fravor, I had him in, who had that sighting in 2004. Very compelling with video evidence, radar evidence. Ryan Graves.
I don't believe his name, but I interviewed jet pilots that were solid people. Perfect. I mean, great pilots, great everything. And they said, we saw things, sir, that were very strange. Like a round ball, but it wasn't a comet or a meteor. It was something. And it was going 4 times faster than an F-22, which is a very fast plane, you know. And it was round, which is, in theory, a great shape.
So when you were talking to these people, was this something that you were compelled to have conversations about? Was this your personal interest?
No, a little bit. It's not a great interest for me, but it's a little interest. I get that question as much as almost any question. Do you think that we have aliens coming, flying around or whatever?
What do you think?
There's no reason not to. I mean, there's no reason not to think that Mars and all these planets don't have life, because
Mars, we've had probes there and rovers, and I don't think there's any life there.
Well, maybe it's life that we don't know, but maybe
there was life there at one point in time. This is the speculation about Mars, that Mars had an atmosphere at one point in time, a long time ago, that could support life. It also had large bodies of water, but we've had no evidence of even bacterial life that exists on Mars. But the universe is pretty vast.
While he doesn't dismiss these accounts entirely, Trump remains skeptical about attributing them to extraterrestrial life. His skepticism leads to a broader discussion about the origin of these phenomena. Joe and Trump explore the idea that what many describe as UFOs could in fact be advanced surveillance drones, possibly from foreign adversaries like China.
I looked at what China did to this. They would have never done it with me, where they put the balloon up, and a lot of people thought for a little while that was one of these things. So,
that's a lot of the speculation too. That some of these drones that hover over battleships, that these are Chinese drones, and that they're not UFOs.
They could be also.
There's some super sophisticated.
But I did interview, let's say 3 or 4 guys that, and without tremendous interest, if you had them, as I said, you'd love to have them as your children. Solid, beautiful people. They said, sir, there's something there.
There's something there.
Said it,
Yeah, I've talked to quite a few of them.
They're not conspiracy guys.
Well, I mean, the Commander David Fravor thing in 2004 off the coast of San Diego, they clocked that thing going from 50,000 feet above sea level to 50 in a second.
Yeah.
They don't know what it is.
That's tough to beat.
Yeah, they saw something in the water. It was hovering over that something that was making a disturbance in the water. They got video evidence of this thing. 2 different fighter jets with pilots in them saw it. There's, visual evidence, photographic evidence, video evidence, radar evidence. Whatever the hell it is, it moves in a way that would turn a human being into jello if they're inside of it. The G-force, no one would survive.
Oh,
so what is that? And it doesn't have a heat signature. They don't know what their propulsion system was. But
when you fly in some of these jets, these pilots have to be in great shape.
Oh yeah, I flew with
When
the
you're
Blue
talking
Angels
about-
once.
Yeah,
Yeah, I got to
example.
fly. I guess
And
it's
those
an
are older,
FA-18,
and those are older machines.
and they're crazy.
When you fly in some of these things,
Oh, my
it's
God.
amazing. Yeah, but
Yeah, I can imagine.
You got to be special.
But these things that these people are encountering are far superior to what we know.
So Trump makes a pointed remark about the Chinese balloon incident, and saying that China would have never dared such a move during his presidency. He then references how some Americans initially mistook that balloon for a UFO, illustrating how speculation and misinformation can quickly cloud public understanding of these sightings. In episode 1762, with guest Josh Zepps, Josh presents a unique way of thinking about the history of human civilization by comparing it to an 800-page book. So like in this imaginary book, each page represents 200 years of human history. And for most of it, hundreds of pages, little changes. You read about small tribes, fire-making, basic tools, and simple societies. But it's only in the last few pages that the tempo changes dramatically. There, suddenly, civilizations explode with innovation. Cars, airplanes, the internet, artificial intelligence, and even space travel. If an alien civilization were reading this book, they would probably just skim through the first 750 pages with just mild interest, then suddenly stop, wide-eyed at the final few, thinking, okay, now this is getting interesting.
Aliens. And so the other thing he talks about is like if the history of human civilization was an 800-page book, so say 160,000 years that we've been like Homo sapiens sapiens with like the kinds of civilizations that, even pre-civilizations, right, nomadic peoples and so on. Then each page of that book is, 250 years, I think I'm doing that maths right, or 200 years, 200 times 800, 160,000. If you can open that book to almost any page and the same shit's going on.
Yes.
Right?
Yeah.
Like all the way up
War.
until basically people are wandering around with pretty primitive tools. A few of them sort of figure out how to use fire. A few of them figure out like how to use metals and stuff like that.
Yeah.
A few of them figure out how to ride horses and domesticate animals. But it's basically the same shit for like 790 pages of the 800-page book of the civilization of our species. And then just towards the end, it's like the page before the very end, like the United States gets settled, Australia gets settled, the Industrial Revolution happens. And then like on the final page, if each page is 250 years of an 800-page book, it's the last half of the page. Nuclear weapons, going into space, landing on the moon, the evolution of the internet, vehicles, cars, climate change, like all of this. And it's like the final few, like Facebook and all this shit, Axie Infinity and little coins and your VR and your Orgasmatron and everything is like the final 2 lines of an 800-page.
Josh uses this metaphor to pose a compelling theory. What if our sudden burst of progress has attracted the attention of extraterrestrial watchers? Because for much of human history, there wasn't much happening that would catch an alien's interest. But things changed after 1945, when we detonated atomic bombs in Hiroshima and Nagasaki. That act marked not just technological advancement, but the beginning of a new planetary era. And coincidentally, or perhaps not, UFO sightings dramatically increased after that point. One of the first major sightings occurred in 1947 when pilot Kenneth Arnold reported seeing fast-moving objects near Mount Rainier, and he described them as saucers skipping on water. And that sparked the now famous term flying saucer. And from that moment, reports poured in from everyday citizens to military personnel. Sightings began occurring over Washington, D.C., and even nuclear missile silos, where unidentified craft were said to interfere with launch systems. These weren't just vague lights in the sky. They were direct, intelligent interactions with our most powerful technologies.
If an alien who knew nothing about anything took that 800-page book, they'd be like, page 233 is roughly the same as page 722.
Yeah.
But they'd get to the end and they'd be like, holy shit, what's going to happen next? Like, I want to read the sequel to this book. I want to read, what's 801?
Well, that's when they would keep an eye on us. When they dropped Fat Man and Little Boy on Japan, that's when UFO sightings started happening all over the globe. There's a giant uptick in UFO sightings. Was it Kenneth Arnold was one of the first, I believe? He's the guy who spotted, I think it's Kenneth Arnold, was the guy that spotted the flying saucers. He was the first one to discuss them as saucer-shaped discs, but they started seeing them all over the place. Like there was encounters in Washington, D.C., and there was encounters over nuclear bases, and where they said that they had shut codes down. And I don't know if there was alien life, and if there is alien life out there that's aware of us. I don't know if they would intervene, because we don't really do much when we find chimps. You know, the scientific community. Yeah, well, the intelligent scientific community doesn't try to interfere with their life and give them guns and this is how you start a fire.
Right, but chimps have noticed that we exist.
Yes.
So, like, even if they don't come, like, I'm not talking about, like, why haven't aliens come and visited us, like, in Independence Day? I just mean, like, when we train our telescopes on the sky, why isn't there any evidence of, like, little flickering radio waves coming from somewhere? But a possible explanation is the one that you say, which is we're looking for the wrong things. Like, we've only been emitting radio waves for a century, and we might be just about to end that and go into some virtual reality metaverse or something, and maybe we'll meet them all there. Maybe we'll unlock some door of the Zuckerberg multiverse and be like, oh, here are a whole bunch of pre-existing civilizations of aliens who already exist.
Yet the phenomenon isn't new. John Winthrop, governor of the Massachusetts Bay Colony, recorded one of the earliest UFO accounts in 1639. He described a glowing object in the sky that moved erratically and defied explanation. So while modern sightings have surged, the idea that something has always been watching isn't new. It's just more noticeable now. So why would an alien species suddenly care? Josh offers another analogy. Chimpanzees are aware of humans. They see us, sometimes interact with us, but don't understand us. We watch them, study them, but rarely interfere unless necessary. If a tribe of chimps suddenly built a fire or developed weapons, whoa, we'd pay attention. That's what the atomic bomb may have been for an alien civilization, a red flag or wake-up call that we're entering dangerous territory.
I can't remember if it was like Michio Kaku or Neil deGrasse Tyson or one of those like great science guys who was saying like maybe any civilization that would be advanced enough to be able to reach out to us or to be noticed by us would also have to be the kind of civilization that would not be a predatory colonizing species, because in that case it would have devoured itself with internal squabbles, before
Klingons.
then. Yeah, you basically have to reach a certain level of spiritual and psychological wisdom and self-awareness and compassion in order to sustain yourself over the course of, so far we've had a couple of hundred years since the Industrial Revolution, and it's only been less than a century that we've had nukes.
Yeah.
That we've had the ability to actually do some serious damage on a global scale. We're just kids. We are toddlers with an AR-15 right now.
Yeah.
I mean, we don't know what we're doing, and we're going to have to grow up into adults, and we're going to have a grown-up civilization.
I have some thoughts on that too. I think one day we're going to recognize that one of the things that holds back progress is our primate bodies. And that the symbiotic relationship we have with technology is going to enable us to bypass emotions. Because emotions and hormones and our need to breed through traditional intercourse, I think we're going to look at that and go, this is the result, or this thing that we have, these primate instincts, these animal instincts. This is the cause of all of our suffering. This is the cause of all of our territorial behavior. This is the cause of jealousy and hate and greed and racism and tribal identity. And all this stuff is all related to these animal emotions.
Right.
If we could get past that, and if we could breed through some sort of genetic manipulation, if we could have a body that doesn't exist riding on these natural animal hormones, but rather, uses photosynthesis like a fucking plant.
Would you still be human?
No, we're not going to be human, just like we didn't, we used to be a monkey, and now we're not a monkey, right? And now we're something else, and we're going to be something new a million years.
And maybe, just maybe, we've been searching for them the wrong way. Humans have only been sending out radio waves for about 100 years. Barely a whisper in cosmic time. As we evolve, we may move away from radio entirely. If advanced civilizations communicate through quantum channels or dimensions we haven't discovered yet, we might be missing their signals entirely. Perhaps they already exist in digital realities in a form akin to our own emerging metaverse. First contact may not be physical. It actually might be virtual. A glitch in our systems, an anomaly in our data. An intelligent presence on the other side of a digital mirror. Looking beyond Earth, most planets in our solar systems are totally inhospitable. But in the broader universe, there could be countless Earth-like planets, some more stable, untouched by catastrophes that shaped us. A civilization just a few thousand years ahead might already have capabilities that we can barely imagine. And if they are watching us, they're likely very patient, peaceful, and curious. Those who survive their own technological adolescence are the ones who will master peace, and definitely not war. So next time you look up at the night sky, remember, we're on the last few pages of the book of human history, and it's the most exciting chapter yet. The question is, are we ready for what happens next? On episode 1597 of the Joe Rogan Experience, Joe sat down with Travis Walton to talk about aliens, telepathy, lost knowledge, and secrets governments don't want you to know. One story in particular took center stage. It was the alien abduction of Travis Walton. It was November 5th, 1975. Travis Walton, a forestry worker in Arizona, was part of a 7-man logging crew making their way home through a wooded area. And when they saw it, a glowing object hovering above the ground, unlike anything they'd ever seen. Curiosity overtook fear, and Travis got out to investigate. And then what happened next would become one of the most enduring and controversial abduction stories in modern history. A beam of light shot from the object and slammed into his chest, lifting him off his feet and throwing him backwards. His co-workers, shocked and terrified, they fled the scene. And when they returned moments later, Travis was gone.
Let's take it back to the day that this happened. You're 22, you're logging, you're in the woods. Tell me what happened.
Well, it's just, when you're done working hard physical labor, everybody's kind of jacked up, and there was a whole lot of chatter in the car. We're just talking away, it's starting to get dark. We just loaded up our equipment. We're headed out. And I looked up ahead, and I saw this kind of glow coming through the trees. First, I thought, no big deal. It was deer hunting season. Thought maybe there was some hunters camped up on the hill up there. Maybe light shining through a tent. It was still something really strange, kind of caught my eye. And one by one, the other guys in the crew started looking, but nobody said, "Oh my God, what's that?" or anything like that. It was just kind of an idle curiosity at first. But when we burst into the clearing where we could see the source of this glow, it was just, whoa, it was just mind-blowing instantly. I inexplicably got out of the truck and ran toward this thing, but I thought it was just going to take off, be gone in a flash. And
so, when you say in the clearing, so are you driving on a dirt road?
Yeah, it's a dirt road. Trees are real thick. This was a part of the contract we hadn't cut in yet, so trees were a lot thicker there, except for this clearing, and. We weren't the only ones that saw it, we found out later. Sheriff had on file people who were in the area that saw it, hunters and fishermen over there at Black Canyon Lake. And the movement that they described was what the crew described when it left. Of course, I didn't see that, but
what did they describe?
They described this glow rising up and streaking off, I believe they said, toward the northeast. There were some people that probably don't want to be public about it, but there was one guy who was just deer hunting, and he worked in military intelligence, and he stuck by what he and his wife saw. They were both together. And another guy that was at Black Canyon Lake, I won't mention any of those guys' names unless they chose to, but found out later that there was more official investigation that nobody talked about at the time. Immediately, though, this was all nonsense, and these guys murdered him. And even my oldest brother, he didn't believe me. He thought they had killed me. What we were doing with the brush that we cut was piling it up. There were piles that were in the clearing so that the Forest Service could burn these piles, when the conditions were right, where it wouldn't spread, wet conditions otherwise, but burn up this excess material to reduce the fire danger in the woods. And my oldest brother was tearing those piles apart. He was certain that my body was under there. And there were some pretty testy confrontations between him and my brother.
Jacques Vallée and James Fox corroborated his story in episode 1574, mentioning how a massive search had followed, turning into a total national story. Days passed with no sign of him, and then 5 days later, Travis called his brother from a payphone in Heber, Arizona, like 30 miles away. He was dazed, disoriented, and deeply shaken. What he later described was no dream and definitely no hallucination. It was vivid.
Truck, and he got up as this thing was spooling up, according to him. It was, and he tried to make a run for the truck, and some kind of energy force hit him and knocked him like a Raggedy Ann doll all the way across like 60 feet, and he landed, and those guys took off thinking they were next, and they left him for dead out there in the woods. And they're driving down the road, hightailing it out of there, and then the driver realizes, like, we can't leave Travis, man. We got to go back and get Travis. And they were all freaked out, thinking that they were going to be next. Finally, they argued, and he said, look, man, I'm going back to get Travis, whether you guys are with me or not. And if you want, you guys can stay here. I'll come back and get you. They're like, no, let's stick together. So they all stick together in the truck. They turned around. They went back. UFO gone. Travis gone. They go down into town, and they have to tell the authorities. And you can imagine, 1975, they're telling local authorities. And there's a small enough town where everybody kind of knows everybody. Hey, our buddy got abducted by a flying saucer, and he's gone. They were like, yeah, you guys are all under arrest for homicide. We'll start an intense search the next day with helicopters, dogs. It made world news all across. As you can imagine, these guys took lie detector tests. They said, they stuck to their story, even though they knew that people wouldn't believe them. They thought they'd killed Travis, and they buried him somewhere in the hills. So they're all doing this 5-day intensive search. Well, Travis Walton reappears 5 days later with facial growth. Here's the really fascinating part of this story that I find incredible, because again, don't look at what the phenomenon does. Sometimes you look at what they don't do. Well, they didn't drop him off where they picked him up. That was the most I've been out there. It's a really remote area in the mountains, in the forest. He would not have made it back alive. Drop him off in the middle of town, they didn't do that either. But they dropped him off right on the outskirts of town, so he could they did it in a little valley, so they minimized any possibility of their exposure. They dropped him off in a place where he could get help, but they would minimize being seen. They did it at night. And 5 days later, he reappears, and of course, he's back, and
As Travis remembered it, the moment he woke up on the ship, a soft light glowed above him, thinking he was in a hospital. The beings were small, gray-skinned, bald, with large, dark eyes. They wore uniform-like clothing, and they didn't speak. Their presence was emotionless, clinical, and terrifying, approached without a word, without a twitch of concern. That terrified him more than anything. Were they alive? Were they machines? They seemed alive, but alive in a way humans aren't. Not emotionally reactive and not expressive. They were just present. So after a few decades of reflection, Travis believes their lack of response wasn't indifference. It was mastery of another form of being, one that doesn't require words or faces to speak. He never claimed they were monsters. They were just only different. Different enough to frighten us. But perhaps in their world, their behavior was natural, even compassionate, like in a way that we can't yet recognize. Panicking, Travis lashed out. He found a clear rod-like object nearby, and he swung it at the beings, who then backed off. He escaped the room, eventually finding what looked like a human, taller, golden-haired, and eerily silent. The man gestured for Travis to follow, leading him to another chamber where two more humanoid figures waited. They placed a mask over his face, and everything went dark. The next moment, he was standing alone by the roadside, watching the craft vanish into the sky without a sound.
Story is he woke up. It's funny, actually. I met with Travis a handful of times, and I sat down with him. And a lot of times when I really want to absorb a story, I close my eyes, and then their words recreate the visuals for me, so I see it. And so that's what I did with Travis at dinner, just the two of us. And I closed my eyes, and he told me he woke up on board. He was on a table, and he was kind of blurry-eyed, but he could see these little beings. And initially thought, what am I looking at here? Where am I? And he saw these little beings, and typical beings, the diminutive body, big head, big almond-shaped black eyes, and he was absolutely terrified. And he grabbed some sort of instrument that was on the table, and he said that he even touched one of them, and he goes, I was surprised at how light it was. It moved really easily, and he started aggressively swinging some instrument that he found on the table towards these things, and then they scurried off and left the room. He went off, they went to the right, he went left, and he was walking down a hallway, and he said, you can imagine like polished aluminum. There were no seams, no rivets, no weld marks, but it was all solid, like one solid piece. And he said it was tight, and my shoulders were rubbing on either side of this hallway. And I was running down the hallway, totally freaked out, didn't know where he was, and he could having a hard time breathing. And he took a left, and he went into this room, and there was a command chair, and he sat in the command chair, and he started playing with buttons. He was trying to get out. He just wanted to get out. And all of a sudden there was a holographic projection of like a star chart that was holographic that appeared. And he was moving with these buttons, and everything started to move, and he thought, my God, if I'm on a spaceship, I could crash this thing. I don't know what I'm doing. And then two very humanoid looking people, beautiful angelic people with these glass bulbs, came in with tight-fitting suits on. And he said, oh my God, you guys are here to save me. Thank God. But they wouldn't talk with him. They just took him by the arm, and they escorted him out. He went down a ramp, and then he said, I was either in a hangar or I was in a big, huge, another spaceship. I don't know if it was a huge hangar on the ground or if it was another spaceship, but there were lots of discs of different sizes parked inside this hangar looking thing, but it was indoors. And they escorted him out. They met with a woman. I said, well, how do you know it was a woman? He said, it was a woman. It had a glass bulb, and they put something over his mouth, and he kind of fought, but he said he was weak. And the next thing he knew, he woke up in a field and looked up, and the disc was just departing, and it was 5 days later.
So what sets Travis' account apart isn't just the detail, it's the corroboration. All 6 of his co-workers were questioned and given polygraph tests. 5 passed with flying colors. 1 test was inconclusive, and none showed signs of deception. Travis himself underwent multiple lie detector tests over the years, and he passed them all. He was also evaluated for mental illness or delusions, and none were found. His story didn't waver over decades. It held its shape, even under public scrutiny.
And they all passed, and I interviewed a number of the eyewitnesses that were with him at the time. And there's a movie made about it called Travis, I believe. You should definitely look into it, but a documentary. But he was really funny. He was working at like a Walmart.
You're going to say pass a polygraph test.
Yeah, they all did. Yeah. But I was talking to one of the witnesses. I'll never forget this. And I was like, God, what did you see? Can you describe what the disc looked like? And he goes, you ever seen like a brand new Corvette? Like that beautiful brand new Corvette? And I said, yeah, I have. He goes, it was more perfect than that. It was just this perfect disc. And he said it was lit up, like you could see these almost little windows in it, and it just suspended in this darkness, and it was kind of just wobbling there. But the way he described it, he made the correlation of a Corvette, a brand new Corvette. Isn't that funny? Yeah.
Joe Rogan, intrigued by Travis's first-hand account in episode 1597, points out something most people overlooked: communication. The aliens didn't speak, yet Travis somehow understood them. Joe mused that perhaps telepathy wasn't science fiction. It was simply a more advanced form of communication. We already transmit data invisibly across devices, right? Who's to say beings hundreds or even thousands of years ahead of us couldn't develop direct mind-to-mind transmission? Travis had also reflected on the blank expressions of the beings. They showed no fear, no aggression, nor empathy. They were silent observers. But what if, as if Travis later considered, their stillness wasn't robotic, it was efficient? If a species communicates purely through thought, facial expressions becomes totally obsolete. Humans wear their emotions on their faces because we need to, right? But if every feeling or every intention, every nuance of thought could be shared instantly, well then, smiles, frowns, and words, they just might be unnecessary relics. This led us to Joe and GSP, to another infamous figure in the UFO community in episode 1315, Bob Lazar. Bob Lazar claimed to have worked at a classified location known as S4 near Area 51, tasked with reverse engineering alien spacecraft. Well, the catch? He and others were kept in silos, isolated from fellow scientists. Collaboration was forbidden, of course. That secrecy, Lazar said, crippled progress. Joe agreed. Real science thrives on open exchange. But at S4, information was compartmentalized and very tightly controlled.
No, they didn't tell me about it. That's one of the things that this group came up with. God, I keep losing my train of thought with this thing.
So this one area, this element 115 was the fuel.
Yeah, it was the fuel.
The world will forgive you for having a migraine. Can I just?
It's really hard to think through this. Just give me a minute.
We'll just give you more booze.
I just want to say one. Yeah, definitely. I was going to say one thing. You know, Bob, for the last 30 years, people have just been on the attack on Bob. You know, getting to know him, the personal effects on his life. It's really hard to understand unless you meet his family and his wife. I mean, this is the last thing he wanted to fucking do, was have to talk.
Yeah, we should explain that, Jeremy. That you and I had this conversation. I watched your documentary. We had this conversation, and I said, I have to talk to him.
Yeah.
The document, there's been detractors. There's been a bunch of people that called bullshit on many of the things that you've said, but over time, many of the things that you talked about, even in the 80s, have proven to be true. Things that people said were not true were proven to be true. Element 115 was one of them. Right?
Well, despite the wild nature of his claims, some of Lazar's statements aged well. Years ago, he spoke of a mysterious element, Element 115, which at the time didn't exist in the scientific record. It has since been synthesized and confirmed by researchers. Though it remains unstable in Earth's environment, Lazar claimed the alien ships used a stable version of it as fuel, totally allowing them to bend gravity and travel in ways that defies our physics.
Critical. So they allowed me to go inside and look at it. Again, I forgot where the hell I am.
So you're going into this craft, and what are you thinking when you're inside of it? Like, what are you seeing?
It's a very ominous feeling because there are no, first of all, everything is one color. It's like a dark pewter color, and there are no right angles anywhere. It's as if somebody took, I've said this before, somebody took a model and fashioned it out of wax and then heated it just for a short time so everything melted. Everything looks like it's fused together. Everything has a radius of curvature where two items meet. It's a really weird looking thing. But there was almost nothing other than a small foldable hatchway that looked recognizable. Everything was really unworldly, to pick on it, a way to describe it.
So you get inside this thing, and it's designed for something that's much smaller than a human being.
Yeah, you can't really stand up till you get to the very center of it.
And how tall are you?
I'm 5'10".
And what do you think this was designed for?
I'd say something close to half my height.
Wow. So these little 3-foot tallish creatures.
Yeah, and the seats were small too. I mean, obviously it was made, for something small. But there is no, there's nothing else in there. There's just seats, the reactor, and some of the subcomponents. There's no control panels. There's no bathroom. There's no decorative components or artwork or anything that you would recognize or trim. I mean, it's just a very bare bones thing.
You're not seeing any screens?
Well, there are archways around it that are part of the superstructure, and that one of the archways can become transparent. When I was in there was another group working on one of the archways, and you could call that a screen, more or less.
The parallels didn't stop there. Joe brought up Commander David Fravor, a former Navy pilot who encountered a Tic-Tac-shaped UFO in 2004 off the coast of California.
So it was 2004, November 14th. It's really, if you draw San Diego to Ensenada, Mexico, we're about 60 miles off the coast in between the two. We're doing workups, so when we get ready to deploy, this was for the 2005 deployment. We were going at sea for November and December of 2004. So we had been out. I had just taken over the squadron mid-October, so I'd been the CO for a month. So we go out and we're putting the battle group pieces together. So it's not just the air wing, but we're on the carrier. We've got the cruiser. We've got all the support ships out there, and we're going to integrate all the defenses and train as one unit. So the exercise that we're going to do is an air defense exercise where there's good guys, bad guys. They're all from the air wing. So the bad guys today are going to be the Marines, VMFA 232, the Red Devils. So they're going to launch, and they're going to go about 100 miles south of the ship, and we're the good guys, and we call it a 2v2, so it's two of us against two of them. And we're going to work with the USS Princeton, which is going to be the controller, and they're going to control the blue forces, and then the red guys are going to give us a presentation that, they're going to try and intercept so we can stop them from getting up towards a carrier. So that's kind of the training set that we're all good. So the Marines take off first, and they start heading to the south. Now, we have no idea that for 2 weeks, the 2 weeks we've been at sea, they've been tracking these things coming out of the sky. And when I talked to the Princeton controller, he's like up to about a dozen of them. They would come down from above 80,000 feet. They'd drop down to about 20,000 feet. They'd hang out, and then they'd go straight back up after about 3 or 4 hours.
Now, when you say they've been tracking them, who specifically?
This is the USS. The Princeton was tracking them. They saw them on the Nimitz radar, and the E2 could see them. Because they're out there, that radar's on all the time. And the Spy 1 system on an Aegis cruiser is, the state-of-the-art, is probably one of the most sophisticated systems in the world.
So typically when something like this happens and there is some unexplained phenomenon, what do they do?
In this case, if we were in a threat environment, they would tell us. But we're off the coast of San Diego. It doesn't come to the air wing, so we have no idea that these things are out there at all.
So they observe these things, and they never bothered telling any of you guys.
That's correct.
So they just knew that these things had been visiting this area, yes, but they just allowed this training exercise to take place anyway.
Yeah, talking to them, for the 2 weeks, they would show up, but it was when we weren't flying. So the typical carrier schedule is, for us, it was about noon to midnight. It's a 12-hour day. There's reasons for that. It can go a lot longer. But for training, we just do the 12-hour day thing. And it's cyclic ops, so you got guys taking off and landing periodically. So we were on one of the first goes. It's noon, 1 o'clock, somewhere around there, and we take off. The Marines take off first, and my buddy Cheeks, who's the CO of the Marine Squadron, he was leading the Red Air. When he launched off the carrier first, they called him up and said, "Hey, what do you got on board?" Well, the original legacy F-18s don't have as much gas as the Super Hornets. Super Hornet's about 30% bigger. So they start talking to him about fuel, and based on how long we're going to be airborne and everything else, they go, "Hey, why don't you just go ahead and proceed to your cap point?" Because we had just taken.
The object had dropped from 80,000 feet to sea level in less than a second. No wings, no exhaust, no known propulsion. The craft's motion, according to Fravor, matched what Lazar described years earlier. It moved not like a vehicle, but like a thought.
So they got to a point where they say, "Hey, merge plot," which means radars have resolution cells, range and azimuth of what the radar can actually see. Once you're inside that box, you can't tell the difference between me and the object I'm going at. We're just become one big blob. So they call merge plot, and so the other jet is on my left-hand side, and I'm going to go to a clock code to make it simple. So the object we're going to end up looking for is right in the middle of the clock, and we are at the 6 o'clock position. And my wingman is off to my left side, so she's further down with her Wizzo. So as we're looking around, we look to the right, and yesterday was a perfect example out here. The water is perfectly calm, no white caps. I mean, it's literally a perfect San Diego, California day. And we see white water, something like if you see a seamount, rock underwater when you're standing on the shore and the waves are breaking over it, and you're like, what is that? It's usually because there's a rock under the water. So it looks like that, but it's about the size of a 737. It actually kind of has a shape of like a cross, and it's pointing to the east. So you've got the long part going east-west, and you got a couple of things going north and south. So as we're looking at it, because that kind of draws our eyes, we're like, oh, that's kind of odd. We look down, and the Wizzo in the other airplane comes up and says, "Hey, skipper, do you?" And that's about what he gets out of his mouth. And I'm kind of looking at the same thing. I go, dude, do you see that? What is that thing? And what we see is this white tic-tac looking object just above the surface of the water, pointing north-south, and it's going north-south, east-west. It's just radically moving forward, back, left, right at will. And it's moving around the disturbance, the white water that we see.
How big is this thing?
So, over time, it's about 40 feet long. And the way I estimate that is, I got a lot of time fighting other airplanes, so it's about the size of a Hornet fuselage. So that's why I say 40 feet. And this thing's just going left. So the first thing you see when you look down, you go, and this is with our eyes, it's not sensors, right? So we're looking down at this thing, and first thing you think is helicopter, right? Helicopters typically stay below 200 feet when we're out there, and they're just driving around. We're pretty far away from the ship for a helicopter for one of ours. So what is it? So the first thing you look for is rotor wash. If you've watched any TV show that starts kicking the water up, and you can see that. It's really easy to see from the air. So we're like, no rotor wash. Matter of fact, don't see any rotors. Don't see any tail rotor. Don't see any, the main rotors. We're like, that's kind of weird. So as we're driving around, we're looking at this thing. We get to about the 9 o'clock position.
How far away are you from this thing?
I'm at 20,000 feet, and it's right down on the surface, right off our right side. So I'm probably maybe a couple miles lateral and 20,000 feet, and we're just watching it move around.
For Joe, it wasn't just one story. It was the overlap. Totally separate testimonies from people with no connection telling similar tales. The silence of the beings, the way they move, the technology that confounds human understanding, the subtle suggestion that these visitors, if they are visitors, operate on a plane where expression, sound, and possibly even individuality means something very different. It doesn't give us answers. It asks better questions. Next, Elon Musk, despite his ambitious plans to colonize Mars, expresses strong skepticism about the existence of extraterrestrial life visiting Earth. In episode 1609 of the Joe Rogan Experience, Elon lays out why he believes there is no solid photographic evidence or other convincing proof that aliens have ever made contact with us. Joe Rogan begins by asking Elon about the Great Filter, a concept linked to the Fermi paradox. It's the puzzling question of why, given the vastness of the universe, we haven't yet found any signs of intelligent alien civilizations. Elon explains that the paradox suggests either there are many alien civilizations out there or none at all, and both possibilities are equally terrifying.
Really? So there'll be you say the Great Filter. What did you mean by that?
Well, so there's something called like the Fermi paradox of like where are the aliens?
Yeah.
So where are the aliens? I think it was Carl Sagan that said like if there either are a lot of aliens or none, and they're equally terrifying. If there are a lot of aliens, well, the invasion ship / bug infestation, just like the
Starship Trooper style.
Well, yeah, it's like an alien civilization might just view us as like a bug infestation.
Right.
It's like, hey, we left that planet, it was fine. Now it's got a bunch of bugs. Just go fumigate it. Like we'd fumigate a house. That's certainly possible. And then, but if there are no aliens, well, could it be that all civilizations are just destroyed before they become interstellar? So. And I want to be clear, like, to the best of my knowledge, there is no evidence for alien life on Earth. There's no evidence for alien life. There's no direct evidence for alien life. No, and if somebody says, "Oh, what about this alien sighting or whatever?" I'm like, listen, it's got to be at least as good as a 7-Eleven or ATM cam. Okay, it's like. If somebody's got at least like an iPhone 1 level camera, like something,
The problem with that is it's just too easy to fake things today, too.
Yeah, sure. At least.
One of Elon's main points is the lack of undeniable photographic evidence. If aliens were real and visiting Earth, he argues, there should be at least one clear, unambiguous photo or video. But as anyone who's followed UFO stories knows, what usually circulates are grainy, shaky images far below the quality of even like the earliest smartphones. Elon compares it to footages from an ATM or even a 7-Eleven security camera. Too low res to be credible. In today's world of AI and advanced image editing, he says it's just too easy to create convincing fakes. They should at least try harder with their faking, he jokes. Joe then brings up a famous UFO incident, the encounter of Commander David Fravor, a U.S. Navy pilot who reported a tic-tac-shaped object off the coast of San Diego, moving with astonishing speed and maneuverability.
And faking
Are
it.
you familiar with Commander David Fravor's account of the Tic-Tac UFO that he encountered off of the coast of San Diego? Lex Friedman?
Yeah.
Lex Friedman interviewed him on his podcast, and I interviewed him as well. And if you ever get a chance to listen to Lex's conversation with him, it's really excellent. But this guy is a naval fighter pilot, and he talked about this thing that they tracked on radar that went from more than 60,000 feet above sea level to 1 foot in less than a second. Shaped like a tic-tac, no visible sign of propulsion, blocked radar, actively jammed their tracking systems, and then went to their predetermined point that they were supposed to, that the fighter jet was supposed to scramble to, went to it 30 miles away in, a couple seconds. Like, they have no idea how it did it. They don't know what it is.
Okay.
And these guys that were working for the Navy off the coast said they had encountered them several times. They didn't know what they were. They didn't know what to do.
What, do they have, like,
just did
photo or
nothing.
something? I mean,
They do. They have video of it.
Okay.
They have video of it. They have, there's, you ever see the New York Times article that came out in 2017 about this stuff?
I don't know.
Yeah, there was a New York Times article in 2017 that was detailing this, and there's a couple other different sightings that were very similar. They were
Sure.
trying to figure out what these things were and why, and it was also in the COVID relief package that the CIA was supposed to release. Yeah, these politicians are trying to figure out what all this shit is, and so they tried to get them to release all the information they have within.
Fravor's story, featured on podcasts by Lex Friedman and Joe himself, described a craft that moved from 60,000 feet to just 1 foot above the ocean in less than a second. It showed no visible propulsion, jammed radar systems, and appeared to have a technology way far beyond our understanding. Navy personnel reportedly encountered these objects multiple times, but had no further explanation for them. Elon acknowledges the story, but he remains unimpressed. While there is some video and radar data, he points out that extraordinary claims require extraordinary evidence, and the existing footage is still inconclusive. Joe then asks Elon a philosophical question. If aliens do exist, would they want to reveal themselves to us? Elon's sarcastic reply highlights the paradox that if aliens wanted to announce themselves, wouldn't they just land openly in some public place like Times Square? Their subtlety or lack of obvious presence suggests to Elon they may not be here at all.
Do you think that they would want us to know? Or do you think they would just be observing and making sure we don't blow ourselves up? Would
I don't know,
if you
man.
were an
They're
alien
real.
civilization?
They sure are subtle. I mean, if they wanted us to know, obviously they could just,
For sure.
show up and walk down Main Street,
Right.
Like, hey, I'm an alien, check me out,
Right.
Here's my spaceship, I just land in the middle of Times Square. I'll be like,
Right.
okay.
Or hover over downtown LA.
Yeah.
Yeah.
We were like, okay, we believe you.
Yeah.
So whatever they are very subtle, these aliens.
How often do you think about it?
0.
Zero? Even though you're thinking about interplanetary travel, you don't really think about aliens.
No, I mean, if they show up, I'm like, great, okay, now this is new information. But we... well,
What an interesting way of putting it. This is new information.
This is new information. Like, where were you guys up till now?
Yeah.
So, anyway, listen, if I see some evidence for aliens, I'll be the first to be like, aliens,
Right. Then you'll investigate. But until then, you think it's kind of a waste of time?
Yeah.
So Elon concludes with a pointed argument against alien visitation based on archaeology. If extraterrestrials have ever been here, surely they would have left behind some evidence, advanced materials, or maybe technology that advanced humans could not have made. For example, a small cube of titanium found inside a pyramid would totally be a dead giveaway. Yet archaeologists consistently find artifacts fully explainable by known technology of their time, with no signs of anything beyond human capability. Everything we found is consistent with what people were capable of back then, Elon says. No mysterious advanced metallurgy, no computers, no titanium cubes buried in ancient ruins. If aliens had visited, there'd be something, some artifact that we just can't explain, but we haven't found anything like that. And he sums it up. Maybe there are aliens, but if so, they're being pretty shy.
Yeah, it definitely seems like a waste of time if nothing's happened so far. You think about all the people that have been researching aliens for their whole life, and they have very little to show for it.
Well, there's...
Other than cool stories.
Yeah. I mean, we have archaeologists going all over the world looking at things. There's people... Like, if we were to find something like, let's say, like a cube of titanium, just like a 1-inch cube of titanium, say, in the middle of the pyramid, I'd be like, aliens for sure. There's no way they could have made titanium back then. There's no way. That's hard. That's all. One little, didn't even need a computer. Like, a computer would be like, hey, wow, computers, they didn't have computers back then, so it must be aliens. But even just like some advanced metallurgy, anything, like, we would say anything like that.
Right. Nothing like that that we can point to that we can't do.
Everything that we found archaeologically is consistent with the time, the technology they had at that time.
Archaeologically.
Yes.
Yeah. So you're just talking about old stuff. Yeah.
Yeah, just throughout history. It's not like...
Yeah.
Like if aliens visited, there'd be something buried somewhere, you'd think. We haven't seen anything. So, anyway... I mean, maybe there are aliens, but they're very subtle. If there are, they're just very, they're being pretty shy. So, as far as we can tell, there's none. So, nor are we seeing signals from any other solar system or anything like that.
Following this skeptical but fascinating conversation with Elon, Joe moves on to discuss UFO sightings with my favorite physicist, Michio Kaku. Michio notes a recent shift in the burden of proof. Whereas once UFO believers had to prove the authenticity of their sightings, now government agencies like the Pentagon are being pushed to explain and debunk these encounters.
So, one of the main points of contention is the lack of visible propulsion method, right? There's essentially, there's no heat signature. There's nothing that we understand to be present that normally exists when something is going at a tremendous rate of speed.
That's right. Not only that, these objects create no sonic booms. When you exceed the sound barrier, you create a gigantic boom that is then shatters windows and can be heard miles around. These objects can effortlessly break the sound barrier and not create a sonic boom. And they don't create any exhaust. We don't see any exhaust trail from these objects. So either they're an optical illusion of some sort, or they have a set of laws of physics beyond what we can muster. Now, if they are an optical illusion, if an object were to move in front of your eyes, traveling at a very slow velocity, but you don't know how far they are away, you may think that object is very far away from you, traveling at enormous velocities. So a weather balloon drifting in front of your eyes can simulate an object traveling at hypersonic velocities if you think that weather balloon is far away from you. So how do you tell the difference? Well, you look at wind patterns. It turns out that many of these sightings, these objects defy the direction of the wind. If they are weather balloons that you confuse with a flying saucer, then they would be moving with the direction of the wind. But these objects do not do that. These objects can go against the direction of the wind. Not only that, but we have multiple sightings. If an object is very, very far away, if an object is close to you, but you think it's far away, then it's traveling at an enormous velocity, while it's actually just drifting in front of your eyes. How do you tell the difference? By having multiple sensors: radar, infrared sensors, visual sighting. Then you can tell how far this object is away from you, and then you can say that, nope, it's an optical illusion. Well, we do that now. We have multiple sightings of these objects. By radar, we know how the velocity, the distance. Each time it comes out to be real. And so that's why we're scratching our heads. Who has this capability? And the answer is, we don't know.
The debate around alien remains as complex as ever, between playful speculation, military encounters, lack of evidence, and new attitudes from science and institutions. For now, Elon Musk's stance is clear. Without concrete proof, skepticism is a logical position to take. Almost immediately, there seems to be proof that Elon's stance against aliens is to shield himself from being discovered simply because he is one, and Theo Von is here to prove it. In episode 1847 of The Joe Rogan Experience, Joe Rogan and comedian Theo Von take a playful look at the ultra-wealthy and their seemingly otherworldly abilities. The idea that billionaires might be aliens isn't about conspiracy theories or sci-fi. It's more of a humorous reflection on how these individuals operate on a totally different plane compared to the average person. The conversation kicks off with a joking observation about Elon Musk's famously pale skin, captured while he's relaxing on a yacht. When was the last time he even spent time in the sun, Joe wonders aloud.
Do something.
Dude, isn't it weird how guys, like if you look at some of these guys like Elon Musk, Facebook, what's his name, Mark
Zuckerberg.
Yeah, and then the other guy, they look like aliens, bro. Their body's white. They're really...
It's because they work all day.
Right,
like
but...
if you look at Elon when he was out on that yacht, those photos they took of him, that motherfucker looks like he hasn't seen the sunlight in years.
Yeah.
Years. Like his body has not been exposed to sun. Like you can't fake that. That whiteness, that's a wild whiteness.
Well, that's what I'm saying. It's almost an extraterrestrial whiteness. It's the whiteness you see when you see an alien.
It's paper.
That's what I'm telling you, is that these guys are, you know, I believe that autism is like kind of the next, there's kind of a space where there is like man and machine. And that's a lot of autism. A lot of autism, you see these guys who will do the calculations and they'll be able to, you know, figure things out. They're almost a little bit more of a computer than a person, or they're somewhere in the middle, kind of.
Like they're more advanced than us.
Yeah.
They're eliminating the emotions that hold people back.
That's what they're doing.
Yeah.
And so when you get that, and you get some of these guys that are like that, I think that's kind of the next evolution. And that's closer really to aliens, man.
Yeah.
When you see aliens, they're not like, oh, fuck, man.
Right.
Been a long day.
Scratching their balls.
Yeah.
Yeah. That's an interesting thing that
They're
I've thought
doing
of
business,
too,
man.
is that maybe that's like the next level of evolution, is that like there's more of a separation between emotional anxiety and all the things, and instead concentrating on calculations and numbers and accomplishments. I mean, just think about all the different things that Elon does simultaneously. That's what's wild. Like, that doesn't seem like a normal human being would have the capacity to develop rockets while he's developing electric cars, while he's developing Neuralink, which is like a human computer brain interface, while he's developing the Boring Company, where he's trying to solve traffic problems.
While he's in the Mediterranean?
Yeah, with a shirt.
This small detail sparks a broader discussion about how billionaires often seem detached from typical human experiences, not just physical, but emotionally as well. Theo Von and Joe riff on how billionaires appear to function without the usual human limitations, right? They rarely seem to need much rest, or even show the anxiety and emotional ups and downs that most people experience. Instead, they appear laser-focused on goals and numbers, tackling multiple massive projects simultaneously without even breaking a sweat. Joe points to Elon Musk as a prime example. The man who founded Tesla, Neuralink, SpaceX, and the Boring Company, often working on several of these ventures at the same time, defies what feels like normal human capacity. You'd have to be an alien to pull off something like that all at once, Joe jokes. Theo adds that maybe this intense focus and emotional detachment represents the next step in human evolution, where anxiety gives way to pure calculation and accomplishment.
It's one of the things that came out about Bill Gates, that Bill Gates had heavily invested in some fund, and this fund had been attacking Elon because he has a short position on Tesla stock. Because like Elon had a conversation with Bill Gates, it was a public thing because Bill Gates asked him to invest in one of his philanthropic, the word came out wrong, philanthropic adventures. And Elon Musk asked him, do you still have a short position on Tesla?
Okay.
And it's like Tesla stock, he shorted it like $1 billion. Like,
oh, damn.
Yeah, it's like a big position. And he said, yeah, I do, but what does that have to do with anything? He's like, fuck off.
Yeah.
I'm not interested, bro.
Damn.
You're betting on me to lose. Get out of here.
They talk about Elon developing revolutionary electric cars, building rockets to colonize Mars, designing a brain-computer interface, and digging tunnels to solve traffic congestion, all while somehow juggling it all without losing composure or energy. It's a dizzying pace that seems superhuman, almost alien. And what's even more ironic, the two notes, is that Elon Musk himself doesn't believe in aliens. Despite his cosmic ambition and obsession with space, Elon remains skeptical about extraterrestrial life. That paradox makes the playful banter even more amusing. The man who some joke might be an alien isn't buying into the idea himself. This segment is less about serious speculation and more about appreciating the surreal nature of billionaire productivity. It touches on something many people intuitively feel. When you see figures like Elon Musk or Jeff Bezos juggling enterprises with billions of dollars, it's hard not to wonder if they're operating on a human level or something totally beyond. So next time you see a photo of a billionaire basking in the sun, or rather not basking in it, you might just smile and ask yourself, could they really be from another world? In episode 1315 of the Joe Rogan Experience, Joe sits with Bob Lazar and filmmaker Jeremy Corbell to unpack a string of controversial topics related to UFOs, including the now infamous Wilson Memo. As the conversation progresses, they dive into the implication of this leaked document, which details an alleged 2002 meeting between Admiral Thomas Wilson and physicist Dr. Eric Davis.
For people who don't know the story, there is a documentary. Jeremy Corbell has a documentary out right now. It's called Bob Lazar, Area 51 and UFOs.
And Flying Saucers.
And Flying Saucers.
Bob Lazar, Area 51 and Flying Saucers.
Okay. Yeah. I first heard your story decades ago. I told you last night when we went out to dinner, I've seen pretty much every interview you've ever given. I've followed the story incredibly closely. Mm-hmm. But for people who don't know the story, let's give them the bullet points. You used to work at Area 51. And Area 51, you went like, huh?
Well, we want to be accurate.
Okay.
Area S4.
S4, okay.
It's about 15 miles south of Area 51.
Okay.
But,
you worked in, how would you describe it?
I guess within the Area 51 compound. You can call that a subset of Area 51.
And you got that job. Before that, you were working...
Before that, I had worked at Los Alamos
right.
National Labs in New Mexico.
And you were involved in what kind of work?
Nuclear weapon development, physics. I mean, they do everything there.
So how do they approach you to say, hey, Bob, why don't you come on out to the Nevada desert?
Well, the way this went down was... at that time, it was 1982, I had put a jet engine in my Honda, and Los Alamos put it on the front page of the paper. Said, Los Alamos man, physicist at the lab, built this 200-mile-an-hour, Honda jet car that I drove to work every day. So I was known in Los Alamos, the guy with the weird car, and you could hear it from a mile away. Anyway, the day that came out on the front page of the paper was the day Edward Teller, the father of the hydrogen bomb, was giving a lecture down there at the lab. And we didn't have much going on that day in our group, and I asked if I could go down there. And I went down there early, and Ed Teller was outside, leaning on a brick wall there and reading the front page of the paper. Now, this is a guy out of history, so I introduced myself. Hey, I'm the guy you're reading about there. And we talked for a little while, and it was cool. Fast forward to years later, I had moved out to Las Vegas and had, left Los Alamos and, went on to other things. And I wanted to get back into the scientific community. I left to start other businesses and that sort of thing. So I sent resumes out, and one of them went out to Ed Teller and referenced our meeting, back in the day. And anyway, he remembered me and gave me a reference, somebody to contact at EG&G. And that's pretty much...
The document, which surfaced publicly around 2019, outlines a secretive effort to gain access to a reverse engineering program tied to extraterrestrial technology, one that had been deeply buried within a Special Access Program, or SAP, and notably outside the reach of even high-ranking military officials like Wilson himself. What makes the memo particularly disturbing is the implication that control over the project had been shifted to a private aerospace contractor, creating a legal and operational shield that prevents public or governmental oversight.
Because the Area 51 at that time was
No, they didn't say
still
anything about Area
classified.
51.
Okay, so
They just said it was in a remote location, and you just know it was up at the test site.
Right.
So, but there was no mention of Area 51 at that time.
So they've done hundreds of nuclear tests in Nevada. That whole area there's giant chunks of Nevada that people.
Yeah, there's a big piece of Nevada, and it's split up into different areas. There's a nuclear test site. There's Area 51. There's the Tonopah test range north of that. There's little sub areas. There's areas where they test chemical weapons and things like that. So it's all broken up as a gigantic test area.
So take me back to first day on the job. You accept a job. They take you out there.
Yeah. It's the first day, really, I didn't really get to see a whole lot. The first day was essentially just paperwork. That's when I flew into Area 51 proper. And I left McCarran Airport and flew what they call the Janet flights. Just, a passenger plane from Las Vegas to Area 51. And it was really just going through a mountain of paperwork that day. From security clearances to... it was like 2 or 3 hours of just solid paperwork, and that was really an uneventful first day.
When did things get weird? When did you realize? Like, at what point in time did you say, "Hey, this is not normal work. Like, this doesn't even seem like it's from this planet"?
That I can't tell you what day that occurred on, because so much time has gone by. The days have kind of fused into one, and I can't separate the days.
Was it a slow burn, or was there a moment of recognition?
Well, the first inkling I had was when I came in. There's this facility that is at S4. It's in the side of a mountain, and normally we had pulled in with the bus and gone around the front through a normal double door. This time that I went in, there were hangar doors open. I went in through the hangar door, and in the hangar door was the disc, the flying saucer that I worked on. I saw it sitting there, and we walked by it. It had a little American flag stuck on the side, and I thought, oh my God, this finally explains all the flying saucer stories. This is just an advanced fighter, and this is fucking hilarious.
Right.
So I went by, I slid my hand alongside it. I got reprimanded immediately for touching the thing. And there was a guy, an armed guard, that followed us in and just said, keep your eyes forward and your hands at your side and just walk in the door.
Lazar supports the core premise of the Wilson Memo, reaffirming that he's claimed for decades that the government doesn't always keep its most sensitive projects in-house. Instead, for the sake of secrecy and plausible deniability, they often outsource the management and security of these programs to private industry. This practice makes it difficult for even top-ranking officials to gain access, and virtually impossible for the public to obtain transparency.
Sometime later that I was introduced to my my lab partner, Barry, and we had some of the subcomponents of the craft in the lab, and Barry was very anxious to get a new lab partner, so he was very talkative and couldn't wait to show me different things. And it was in the demonstration of the reactor working where it caught my attention to where this is technology that doesn't even exist. So, I mean, that was the first time I knew that this is really something different.
What was it? What was it about this reactor that made you think that it didn't exist technologically?
Well, it was I actually have to back up because there were some briefings that I read before that certainly gave me the impression that this was going to be a weird job, but this was the first hands-on thing. This was a small reactor about the size of a hemisphere, about the size of a basketball, on a metal plate, and when it was running, it produced a gravitational field of its own. Now, this is something that we can't do. We can't produce any gravity. The only way we get gravity is from large quantities of mass. But there's no machine we can have that turns on that makes gravity. Like, you can turn on an electromagnet and it makes a magnetic field. We can't make a gravitational field. Anyway, this device was producing that. And Barry said, almost like he was bragging, go ahead, try and touch the sphere. And I couldn't. It pushed my hands away, just like two like poles of a magnet. So that was...
so like when you take two magnets and you try to press them together and they push against each other?
Yeah, that kind of cushion feeling, but you can't get them together. The closer you put them, the more they push. But
and you felt that physically
with
your
my hand? Yeah, now there's nothing that does that. And that immediately caught my attention, going, wow, this is something else.
Joe probes further, asking if there are people who fully understand what's being hidden. Lazar responds that yes, there has to be. He explains that projects like these are compartmentalized. Scientists only know what they need to know, and security teams are kept out of the technical loop. Nonetheless, some key individuals might retain the full picture across decades, so the program can be revisited once science catches up with the mystery material.
Thought, like when you felt that and you knew that there was nothing that you were aware of that could produce this.
Then that connected me to the briefings that I read on the first day at S4 was that, everything that I had read was apparently accurate.
What were you reading?
It was kind of an overview. This project was to back engineer the alien craft. And specifically, it was to try and back engineer and see if we can duplicate the technology with available materials. Now, to do this, they split the project into many different pieces for several reasons. They do this on all classified projects, so nobody has the complete story, but they compartmentalize everything. Now, we had the power and propulsion system. So what the briefings they gave me were like a 1 or 2 page overview of some of the other projects that were going on, on the craft. The only reason they do that is just in case what you're working on is connected intimately in some way that we don't know of to one of the other projects. You have to know their their existence. So again, they have everything from metallurgy to weapon potential of the craft, and these were all essentially very short briefings, but mine was just power and propulsion, and it made it very clear that what I read was...
Jeremy Corbell adds more context by tying this discussion to known figures in the UFO and aerospace research world, particularly Robert Bigelow. Bigelow, known for his work with Bigelow Aerospace and once for owning Skinwalker Ranch, reportedly had ties to several government-sponsored investigations into unidentified aerial phenomena. And he's mentioned in proximity to programs that may have housed exotic materials or other classified evidence.
The excitement kind of turned to dread at some point because the amount of power we're dealing with is astronomical. I mean, to affect gravity, to produce the effects like this equipment does, takes huge amounts of power. And I've given the example before of taking a small portable nuclear reactor and, putting it back into Victorian times, with the scientists of the time, and just dropping it in a room. And they come and look at it and see that it's producing power and wonder how it works, so they start taking it apart. And as soon as they get some of the shielding off, the people are going to drop dead because of the radiation inside. Now, the people have no idea that radiation even exists back then. But anybody that comes in to check on them will also drop dead. And, there's no reason that exact scenario couldn't happen with what we're dealing with. We have no idea how the physics operate within this thing. The power levels are, like I said, astronomical. Like, it's incredibly dangerous to tinker with something like that. And, in some respects, we were guinea pigs. Just try to find out how to make them.
Corbell draws a link between the Wilson Memo and Lazar's long-standing narrative, suggesting that when scientists hit a dead end with alien technology, they shelved the project for years, hoping that material science and engineering advances will allow progress when the time is right. On episode 1233 of the Joe Rogan Experience, physicist Brian Cox shared his thoughts on life beyond Earth. Cox, a professor of particle physics, believes that the conditions that give rise to life on Earth, like hydrothermal vents and subsurface oceans, also exist in our solar system. Cool, right? Europa, Jupiter's icy moon, is a key focus. It's believed to hold twice as much water as Earth's ocean beneath its frozen crust. Thanks to tidal forces from Jupiter, this water may remain liquid and warm enough to support life. If hydrothermal vents exist there, as they do in Earth's oceans, life could potentially thrive even in the absence of sunlight. Cox also pointed out that Mars once had similar conditions billions of years ago. In both places, scientists hope to discover microbial life, which could confirm that life can arise naturally under the right circumstances. Cox believes that it could be more surprising if life didn't exist elsewhere.
Are you aware of the speculation that was going around? How recent was it, that Occupy thing, the octopus eggs? There was a group of scientists that were speculating that it's panspermia, the idea of panspermia, that it's possible that octopi had come from somewhere else. Some frozen eggs had actually come from somewhere else and landed on Earth. And these were like legitimate scientists who were contemplating it, not morons.
I don't think...
Have you seen this?
No, I didn't. But I mean, I think it's unlikely. So panspermia doesn't have to be unlikely.
Right.
I mean, for example, you might have
Sure.
seen the other day we found an Earth rock on the moon.
Yes.
Right. Well, it's back
Yeah.
on Earth now because the Apollo
Right.
astronauts brought it back, didn't they? It's 4 billion years old or something like that.
One of the oldest rocks ever found.
Yeah.
Right.
So we know that material gets transferred between planets. And so it's not inconceivable that microbes could survive that journey. Right? We know that microbes can survive in space, for example. So that isn't mad. It's probably unlikely, but it's not mad. But with the octopus, I hadn't heard that. But the thing is that the octopus is still extremely similar biologically to us. I mean, the differences are negligible.
Yeah.
So it's still got the same energy system with the single ATP and DNA and all that stuff. It's all very, very similar.
And even more bizarre is the idea that some life on Earth might not be from here. Rogan brought up the idea that octopuses could be of alien origin, a concept explored in a 2018 scientific paper titled Cause of the Cambrian Explosion, Terrestrial or Cosmic. The paper suggests that octopus's bizarre intelligence, nervous system, and ability to edit their own RNA could stem from alien genetic material arriving on comets. Though widely disputed, it reflects the growing willingness to question where life comes from and what might be influencing it.
I'm looking at a different one from a different website. It's about the same thing. It has to do with the Cambrian explosion. And there were 33 authors on a paper that got published in the Progress in Biophysics and Molecular Biology that talked about this possibility. There are other people that disagree with it, though.
Right.
I mean, I suppose I haven't seen it. So I think it's unlikely because the octopus is extremely similar to us. So that suggests a common origin to me. That I suppose the counter argument you could advance would be there's only one way to do life. So you could say that actually, given, because the laws of physics and chemistry are the same everywhere. So maybe DNA is the only way to do it. So that's the way it gets done.
Which is why they're so similar to us.
Yeah, so
although so alien as well.
Yeah, they're not, though. You know, that's the thing about an octopus. That's why I'm surprised about it, because they're not that alien. They're very similar.
Well, they're in their abilities. I mean, their ability to transform their outer texture and their color almost instantaneously.
Oh, yeah.
I mean, they have incredible camouflage abilities that really don't exist in the mammalian world.
Yeah, but on a cellular level, you look at an octopus cell under a microscope, and you wouldn't be able to tell the difference between an octopus cell and a human cell.
So the only way that would make sense is if all life comes from basically the same kind of building blocks and it just varies depending upon the conditions and where it takes place.
I'm guessing, but yes, that must be the only way you could sustain that, given that they're so similar to us, because they really are, biochemically, is that's the only way it can be done, given the building block, the toolkit, the laws of nature and the elements and so on that we have in our universe.
We have so many different life forms on our planet, but if we found anything that's remotely similar to what we have here on Earth on another planet, it would be such an incredible discovery. Like if we found a frog on the moon, I mean, the world would stop, right?
I'd be very surprised if we found a frog on the moon.
But I mean, if we found anything anywhere that is in any way similar, an insect on Mars.
Well, this is, I mean, as I say, it'd be micro. I think it'd be single-celled things. And remember, I mean, you mentioned the Cambrian explosion. So that is, what we do know about Earth is that although life began, let's say, 3.8 billion years ago, it wasn't until around 600 million years ago or so, or maybe at most 700, that you see any complex multicellular organisms at all. So for something like 3 billion years, it was single-celled alone. And that's one of the reasons why I would guess, if I had to guess, I would say that microbes would be common because life began very quickly on Earth. And I wouldn't be surprised if we find it on Mars. But complex life, multicellular life, insects, plants, intelligence, I would guess would be very rare because it took so long on Earth.
So, how do these two narratives intersect? On one side, you have scientists like Cox exploring real possibilities of life beyond Earth. And on the other hand, theorists like Bravo warn that our perception of space and even our search for aliens might be part of a larger psychological operation. For Bravo, the timing is suspicious. The Pentagon recently declassified UFO footage. Major news outlets are finally discussing unidentified aerial phenomena. But Bravo sees this shift as manipulation, not revelation. He believes it's all part of a long-standing plan to guide the public toward one inevitable conclusion, that the only way to survive an alien invasion is to unite as one, under one government.
And you would have to have enough power or mass to be able to fold those two things together.
It tends to be weird stuff, like stuff that has a negative pressure or something like that. So stuff that has physical properties that are just bizarre. And that no matter or energy that we know of in the universe has, so that to make the geometry happen.
But it's conceivable in theory that this could exist, even though it doesn't.
It's a debate ultimately. So wormholes are a good example. So that would be quite literally. We talked about the surface of the Earth. So you fly to Australia from LA, and you have to go quite a long way around this edge of the Earth. Or you could tunnel straight through and get there quicker, right? So you can. That's a wormhole.
Jamie's got a little graphic up there.
There it is. There's a wormhole. So you could go all the way around the edge, or you could take the shortcut. So the question is, so you can do that in Einstein's theory. You can write down that geometry, and there it is. So the first question is, can you make it? And as we said, we don't think that stuff exists.
Right.
There's a second set of bits of theoretical work, which are, if you had a wormhole, then what would happen if you tried to travel through it? And what seems to happen is that they become unstable the moment that anything tries to go through. So you get kind of a feedback of stuff going through and through and through and through, and so it collapses. And there's a great book by Kip Thorne, actually. We just mentioned him. He got the Nobel Prize last year for the gravitational waves, and he wrote a brilliant book, I think it's in the 80s, called Black Holes and Time Warps, where he talks about the answer is we don't fully know, but most physicists think that even if they existed, they would be unstable. And as soon as you even try to transmit information through them, send a bit of light through, then there would be this sort of feedback and they'd collapse. And ultimately, the reason we don't really know absolutely is because you need what's called a quantum theory of gravity, and we don't have one. So we don't have the theoretical tools to be absolutely sure.
Whether you agree or not, Bravo's theory forces an uncomfortable question. If a global threat were announced tomorrow, would we be able to distinguish truth from manipulation, or would we be too scared to ask? And that's what makes this theory so captivating, not just because it sounds outrageous, but because it hits on something totally deeply human: our fear of the unknown, our desire for safety, and the price that we're willing to pay for it. Imagine you're a child and you're at school, running around the playground, and then suddenly seeing something completely out of this world. A silver disc descending from the sky, beings with large black eyes stepping out, and messages being sent straight into your mind. This isn't a scene from a science fiction movie. It's a real-life story of the 1994 Ariel School UFO incident in Zimbabwe, and it remains one of the most compelling UFO encounters ever recorded. James Fox, a seasoned documentary filmmaker who has dedicated his life to investigating UFOs, spoke about this story on episode 1574 of the Joe Rogan Experience. Though now known for his deep dives into alien encounters, Fox originally dismissed the aerial school case when he first heard about it back in 1997. It took a decade and a nudge from someone close to Steven Spielberg for him to revisit the story. And when he finally did, it changed everything. The aerial school encounter occurred on the morning of September 16, 1994, in the rural town of Rua, Zimbabwe. At around 10 a.m., 62 children, aged 6 to 12, were playing outside while the teachers were in a meeting. And that's when kids saw strange silver objects in the sky. According to them, one or more of the craft landed or hovered just beyond the schoolyard.
That's one of the weird things, is that there's different versions of aliens that people claim to see, but the iconic Close Encounters of the Third Kind, large head, large eyes, very thin body with no musculature, no genitals, that all seems to be very consistent.
Correct.
Yeah, like the African landing case in Rua, Zimbabwe in 1994.
That is a crazy part of your documentary, because you see these children that are going to school in Africa. This thing lands, and then they draw pictures of it. The children are all consistent. And then 20 years later, they all meet and talk about it again. And now, when people lie, a lot of times when people lie, when they're making up a crazy story like being abducted by a UFO, they want to be special. They want to be different. Like, I was the one they chose. There's none of that from these kids. They all have the same story. They all had the same, they didn't have the best drawing skills, but they all drew something that's incredibly similar. It was all a classic-looking UFO, flying saucer-type vehicle, and a classic-looking, iconic creature that is just like the Close Encounters of the Third Kind. They all described something that looked like it was wearing a black wetsuit. They all described something that had large eyes and a large head for its body.
And even more shocking, several beings reportedly emerged. The children described them as small, with large heads and big black eyes and tight black suits. Some said the beings floated or glided rather than walked. A few students ran in fear. Others stood and watched. Some claimed the beings communicated with them telepathically. The message? That humans were harming the planet and should be cautious with technology. Local researcher Cynthia Hine arrived shortly after to speak with the children. BBC correspondent Tim Leach also interviewed them and was blown away by the consistency of their stories. A few months later, Harvard psychiatrist Dr. John Mack, who studied alien abduction cases, flew to Zimbabwe to interview the children one-on-one. He concluded that they were not making it up. These kids were genuinely affected by what they saw.
I was doing my first documentary back in 1997 when I was just naive enough to think I can get an interview with Steven Spielberg. We had a mutual friend involved, this woman Janet, and she gets back to me and she's like, yeah, so Spielberg's definitely not going to meet with you, but he knows you're working on this UFO documentary. He thinks you should look into this landing case that happened in Africa at the school. And I said to myself at the time, and remind you guys, that I was making a film on UFOs, and I dismissed it so quickly because I thought, there's no way that a mass landing with the sheer volume of eyewitness testimony at a school in broad daylight could happen and the whole world not know about it. So I just walked away from that story for about 10 years. 10 years later, I'm doing an event at the National Press Club with Leslie Kane, who was part of the article in the New York Times that came out in 2017. And she introduced me to this guy, Randall Nickerson. And she's like, oh, he's working on this landing case in Africa. Long story short, he's working on a film now, I think it's coming out next year, specifically on just that case. Dan Farah is producing it. And he said, I'm working on the case, and if you want to do something with me on it, a small piece, I could. So I got back into it. I licensed some of the footage that Dr. John Mack, the Harvard psychiatrist that came and interviewed the school children on camera within a week of it happening. He unfortunately looked the wrong way in London, got run down by a car and died. So I contacted the Institute with the help of Randall Nickerson. I licensed the archival footage. We tracked down the witnesses today. We flew them in from all different corners of the world, brought them together. A lot of them were standing right next to each other. They came face to face, and one of the things I realized was that there were roughly 100 kids in the playground, broad daylight, aerial school, Rua, Zimbabwe, 1994, and they got within some of them within arm's length of these beings. and brought these witnesses together for the first time in 20 years. And a lot of them hadn't even told their significant others, just because they said they were tired of having to defend this. And I myself didn't believe it when I first heard about it back in 1997. And that segment of the film is the most, in my opinion, is the most powerful segment, because
it's very compelling.
You've got all these children saying what they saw on camera after it happened, and then you see them 20 years later, and then we go to Africa and we meet with the headmistress, or she was a teacher at the time. We meet with other witnesses. We go to the landing site. We talk to people at the school. That case is absolutely, and it was witnessed by lots of other people in and around the area for several days before it chose a school to land.
It's so compelling because the children are all clearly, they're not actors. So as they're adults later, they're all talking about this moment, and it's like they had a religious experience together. Like they're all sharing it and talking about it, and you could tell it's like it's a deeply moving experience. If they were actors, they wouldn't have been able to do such a good job, because to convey the reality of that moment to them, to be able to have this interpretation of this event where they're all consistent in the story and they're all clearly still shook by this moment. It's really interesting, because if you had that scene in a movie, it would take like a really good actor to pull it off. And they'd probably need multiple takes. They'd probably want to get the best one. But those kids, the way they were talking about it and the way they were drawing it, you're like, wow, it really does seem like something happened to them.
I know how credible.
Fox, who later featured this event in his documentary The Phenomenon, called it the most powerful segment of the film, not just because of what happened, but because of how deeply the witnesses were impacted. 20 years later, many have never told their spouses about the event, afraid of being ridiculed. But when they finally came together again, their stories still matched, their emotions still raw. It was as if they had experienced something spiritual, something life-altering that bonded them forever. Fox pointed out how striking it was to see their drawings and hear their words from back then, and then compared them to their adult reflections. If they were actors, he said, they couldn't have done it better. Their sincerity was impossible to fake. But here's the twist. The aerial school encounter isn't the only case of UFOs appearing at a school. Fox brought another incident from Westall High School in Melbourne, Australia. On April 6, 1966, nearly 200 students and teachers witnessed a similar phenomenon, a silver disc-shaped object hovering over the school grounds. It descended behind trees in an area called the Grange. Some witnesses claimed to see light aircraft following it, while others recalled a circular patch of flattened grass where it may have landed.
Right. But I definitely had to ask myself, look, during the production of the film, Paula Harris actually turned me on to another landing case that happened in Australia in 1966 at a school, and this time there were roughly 300 witnesses that saw a disc land right outside a playground in Australia. And we went to Australia and investigated that case, went to the landing site, talked to eyewitness testimony, people that jumped the fence at the school playground and ran over to where this thing landed. And then we even interviewed a guy who snapped a photograph of a disc, a Polaroid, back in 1966, 2 days prior to the incident. So it's very probably that we have photographic evidence, we have eyewitness testimony, and for the first time we've got testimony from a science teacher. So why do these things land at schools? It seems like, and I'm just totally speculating here, but it seems like if I were going to do that, it seems like a pretty benign environment. We've had testimony from military guys that we take a fairly hostile position towards things that penetrate sensitive military installations. And, so maybe, I'm just saying, maybe
it's safe.
Maybe it's safe.
Maybe but we have to stop reacting to.
Like Ariel, the school quickly tried to close it. The headmaster held an emergency assembly and told everyone that they had not seen a UFO and should not talk about it. Some students say men in uniforms arrived, cordoned off the area, and took soil samples. The entire event was swept under the rug, officially at least. What's curious is that these UFOs seem drawn to schools. Fox speculated that schools might be seen as safe, non-hostile environments, unlike military bases where incursions are usually met with aggression. If you were an intelligent observer from another world, Wouldn't a playground full of innocent children be the least threatening place to land?
Intrusions by UFOs as a threat. I mean, that's the whole thing behind this new task force. And as much as I respect, the task force, and my colleagues and I want to cooperate with them to the extent that we can bring information or resources to what they do. But there is more. This should not be looked at specifically as a threat. I mean, with the phenomena that we observe, I mean, if they wanted to blow up those F-18s, they could do it, okay? Obviously, that's not what it's all about. And this idea of just labeling it all as
In both Zimbabwe and Australia, what makes the story so powerful is the number of witnesses, the consistency of their testimonies, and the emotional weight they still carry. These weren't isolated sightings. They were shared experiences, etched into memory, told the same way years later. Whatever landed at those schools, whether alien, interdimensional, or something else entirely, it left a mark. And for the children who were there, that moment remains as vivid as ever. The question isn't whether they believe what they saw, it's whether we're willing to listen. On episode 2264 of the Joe Rogan Experience, Joe sat down with Jason Sands and Lenville Logan to explore the enigmatic legend of Skinwalker Ranch, an isolated stretch of land in Utah's Uinta Basin, long plagued by reports of paranormal activity. From UFO sightings and cattle mutilations to electromagnetic anomalies and bizarre creatures, the ranch has become ground zero for a hybrid of Native American folklore and modern mystery. The land takes its name from Navajo legends of skinwalkers, evil entities said to possess humans or shift into animals. And though it lies on Ute territory, the Ute people also consider the area cursed and avoid it, believing powerful forces dwell there.
A childhood experience with a UFO previous to that when I was 10 years old. So I didn't really get an interest in UFOs at all. I just thought it was strange. It was also a shared experience with my mother.
What was the experience?
Well, it was just a red orb that came down. It looked like it came from the atmosphere, distance, and then kept approaching my bedroom window and ended up kind of hovering near the bottom of my street. And I was screaming to my parents, there's a strange light outside, and nobody responded. So I ran out to get my binoculars, my dad's binoculars, and ran out to the front lawn. And finally, my mom was the only one that responded. And we both got to see it taken off as it came across the rooftop of my friend Eddie's house at the bottom of the street. And that's what she's got to see, my mother and I.
Did it make any noise?
Zero noise. No, it just looked like a total mirror, completely polished mirror, kind of oblong, kind of a ship or craft.
How big was it?
It was about 30, 35 foot.
Really?
Maybe even 40 foot. Yeah, it was about half the size of my friend's rooftop, if you were to measure it from front to back. So, it was pretty big. It was enough for probably you or I to stand up in it and walk around a little bit.
And your mother has the exact same recollection of the experience?
Actually, I've been asked to write a book, so I've got her writing her part of that. And I'll have the same thing. I've had another couple of experiences that my family members and other friends probably write up soon.
And so this was all when you were young, and so you had this memory in your head when you started working for the government. But when were you introduced to the whole idea that this is a real thing?
Well, I know I was on mission because I just kind of filed away that UFO experience at 10 years old for many years, and I just was kind of even skeptical sometimes about, well, maybe it was just something, an aberration in my mind.
The ranch entered a new chapter of notoriety in 1994 when Terry and Gwen Sherman bought the property and quickly found themselves overwhelmed by inexplicable phenomena. Lights hovering in the sky, disembodied voices, vanishing livestock, and encounters with creatures immune to bullets. The final straw was a series of surgical cattle mutilations, bodies left bloodless, organs removed with eerie precision. 2 years later, they sold the ranch to billionaire Robert Bigelow, who launched a scientific investigation under the National Institute of Discovery Science. His team recorded oddities, glowing orbs, sudden radiation spikes, strange magnetic fields. But concrete conclusions never came, and much of the research remains hidden from the public.
Yeah. So if you're one of those people that had a really profound experience with a creature from another world.
Yeah.
You can't really explain it to everybody else. So you're looking for something else to make it seem real, because you start questioning everything that you know. And that's how I was. My first experience was when I was a kid in England, and me and a friend were just throwing a ball back and forward. And in the old days, people used to wrap the sneakers around the telephone lines.
Mm-hmm.
So I just happened to see that there was some sneakers up there. And then all of a sudden I look off in the distance, and there's this UFO that looks like an iron that you would iron your clothes with. The whole bottom part was glowing. The top part was just dullish gray, because England and gray skies.
Was
whatever.
the shape the top like an iron as well?
Yes. Yeah.
So it had like a hump to it?
It kind of had a hump to it. So I'm sitting there going, well, what is that? And he goes, that's got to be a helicopter, because it's just standing there. And I was like, but I don't hear any noise, And then next thing you know, we saw, I believe it was 2 F4 jets coming, because you could hear them. Those engines are loud. And these 2 jets come out, and this thing just goes, phew. And this is when I was living in Nottingham, England, because I'm British by birth. All right. So, our parents were like, too much imagination, da-da-da-da-da-da-da. And I just kind of kept it in the back of my head. And then I saw things later, and I just kept questioning them. And finally it was like, I'm really going to have to look into this.
So how old were you?
I was about 10.
10. So you said you were like 10 as well?
10, yeah.
This is one of the things that I keep hearing about, this idea that children and their innocence, or they don't have this blockade in their head to keep them from. They don't think it's ridiculous to think about aliens. They're open to it more.
We talked about this, and
We're programmed as we get.
In 2016, Brandon Fugel purchased the ranch, coinciding with the launch of The Secret of Skinwalker Ranch, a History Channel series that continues to chronicle disturbing findings. Electronic devices fail without warning, investigators fall sick, and mysterious flying objects defy explanation. One standout story Joe Rogan shared involved a blue-collar man who encountered a sentient orb on the property. The glowing sphere floated through his yard, entered his home, and passed through walls like mist, an interaction so vivid it seemed like a form of communication. Joe vouched for the man's sincerity, describing him as rational, grounded, and entirely uninterested in fame or attention.
Oh, you did?
Well,
yeah.
How did that go?
Well, I was doing it for a television show, and we interviewed a bunch of people that lived there. And one guy, there was a lot of people that they wanted to be interviewed. And then when we got there, they chickened out. It seemed like there might be some drug use going on in the surrounding areas. A few people seemed like a little on tilt, but I think that's a good part of America. Yeah. I think there's a lot of people. You could find some packets of people in America that are just doing drugs. So I wouldn't say that was what it was, but this one guy that I talked to didn't seem like that at all. He seemed very respectable. I don't remember what he did, but he was a very smart guy, blue-collar guy, and lived in this very modest house, and he had this story of this thing that flew into his yard and through his house, and he said it was a small orb, and he said it seemed to be communicating with him. And
wow,
this guy didn't have any other bullshit stories. He didn't have any
just
claims of just this one experience that he said was beautiful. He said it was incredible, that this thing seemed like it was alive. It seemed like it was communicating with him. And it went right through the walls, and then it went through the wall again and disappeared.
Lenville Logan added a similar account from a paranormal conference, where a woman showed him a photograph taken on her birthday of an orb hovering in a doorway. She claimed it entered her room with a high-pitched charge, pulsing with a light like a heartbeat. The photo captured on an iPhone reinforced a reoccurring theme. These orbs don't behave like ordinary light distortions. They appear to possess intent, as if observing or engaging with their environment on their own terms.
Like that, I was like, is my flies down or something? What did I do, And as soon as I stepped off the stage, I said, Mr. Logan, what are they? What are they? And I was like, what do you mean? She pulls out on her phone the most beautiful, pristine picture of an orb sitting in a doorway. And I'm like, what happened there? And she said, it was my birthday. And she said, all my family was there. And she said, but I got tired, so I was laying down. And she said, I heard like this electrical discharge going on. And she said it came right through her wall, started floating across her room. She said it got to her doorway. She screamed, and all her family came, and the son, I guess it was, took the picture of the orb. And I was so amazed by her story, I even forgot to ask her to give me a copy of the picture.
How long ago was this?
This was like 2 years ago.
So fairly modern phone.
Yeah, it was an iPhone. She was they were from Northern California, and they drove up to this thing, and I'm just like, so what happened? She said it actually sat there and did this like a heartbeat, getting bigger and smaller.
Whoa!
And then she said it just kind of went back out the way it came in, and she goes, "What are they? You were on the task force. Don't you know about these things?" And I was like, "Whoa, we're not omnipotent. We're trying to learn just like you are." And every year I've been back there twice now, and every year I go, "Hey, if those two Asian ladies are in here, can we talk?" And they haven't shown back up, but it sounded just like.
These orb encounters raise complex questions. In the UFO community, orbs are often seen as surveillance tools or alien drones, operating on physics humanity has yet to understand. Their ability to pass through solid objects hints at technology or nature far beyond anything we know. Some even interpret them as sentient manifestations, alien or otherwise, that interact with humans directly. Meanwhile, in paranormal circles, orbs are associated with spirits, angels, or energetic imprints, visitors from another realm rather than another planet. Still, skeptics argue that most orb sightings have mundane causes: dust reflecting camera flashes, lens flares, insects, or psychological illusions during hypnagogic states. Not all orbs are anomalies. Many are tricks of light, biology, or even the subconscious mind.
New whistleblowers can shed some more light onto how this happens, and I think we need to hear a little bit more about these folks that came forward about the psionics team and what exactly is this meditation? What are they linking up with? Does it feel mechanical? Does it feel like an entity? Because when you hear Jake talk about his experiences, he had a really spiritual experience with one of these things. While he was carrying it to the next place, he was literally crying in the interview.
This is that egg-looking thing.
Yeah, he said that he felt, he called it the 8-gon, I think, craft. That one is the one he had the spiritual.
8-gon?
8-gon, like a hexagon, but it has 8 sides, or octagon, I think would be the actual term. But he said it had like a 8-sided kind of a disc.
So this is not the thing we're talking about with
the
helicopter?
Not the egg one, this is a different one.
A different one.
Yeah,
so he encountered
two.
a different one.
Yeah.
Oh, okay. I didn't see that interview.
Yeah, well, the detailed one, I think you can pull that one out of there. But he mentioned that one, he had like a real, no kidding, it was beautiful. And he cried about it because it was so beautiful of an experience.
Wow.
And I have a question about all those things, because if they can get into our minds, my thing is that how do you know that that's not what they're putting into your head? Because like what they experienced at a Skinwalker Ranch when they saw the creature on the top floor, they said as they approached it, they started feeling fear. And as they approached it further, the fear just kept intensifying to the point where it was like a physical change in the temperature. So if someone can put fear into you, why can't they put love into you and all these different things? And I'm not saying that it's not genuine, but part of being on the task force, you have to question everything.
Well, we can do that to each other.
Yeah.
Yes.
We can do that to each other through threats. We can put fear into people. We can do that. There's a crazy documentary called Holy Hell, and it's about this guy who was a cult leader. And one of the things that he would do to these people, he was a hypnotist too, but one of the things he would do to these people, he called it the knowing. And he would put his hands on them, and they would say that they would experience God. They had to be prepared for it. It was a thing that was very difficult to get. He had to approve you for it, and all these people wanted it, and they never got it. It was like a thing he held over your head. And then when he actually did it, even though this guy turned out to be a complete fraud and the cult disbanded, all those people talk about that moment when they had that experience with that guy, and they say it really happened.
Wow.
Because the human mind is weird, right?
But what sets Skinwalker Ranch apart is that some of these encounters resist easy dismissal. They're captured on modern devices, witnessed by credible individuals, and sometimes even corroborated by physical symptoms like nausea and disorientation. Joe Rogan's balanced approach, curious yet cautious, mirrors what many feel. Not everything is true, but then again, not everything is false either. On episode 1883 of the Joe Rogan Experience, Joe Rogan hosted former Navy F-18 pilot Ryan Graves to discuss an extraordinary topic: unidentified flying objects or UFOs. Graves, who holds a degree in mechanical and aerospace engineering, served both operationally and as an instructor pilot. With years of experience flying in U.S. airspace and exposure to high-grade military technology, his first-hand encounters with unidentified aerial phenomena carry notable credibility.
My name is Ryan Graves. I have an engineering degree, mechanical and aerospace engineering. I promptly left doing that to go fly F-18s for the Navy as soon as I graduated college. Did that for about a decade, both operationally in combat as well as an instructor role, teaching the new students. And, you know, we did witness something while we were flying in our jets, but, you know, we were doing it we witnessed it in the context of our just everyday flying in our missions.
And what year was it that you witnessed this?
So we started seeing these in 2014 was the earliest that I know. 2013, late 2013, early 2014.
And could you just...
During the conversation, Graves describes how his squadron began picking up unknown objects during flights off the east coast of the United States. These weren't simple radar glitches. The contacts were consistent, visible across upgraded radar systems, and confirmed through camera systems like FLIR, which detect infrared heat signatures and visuals. And even more startling, these objects were often seen maneuvering across the sky in erratic patterns or hovering motionless against wind speeds of over 100 knots, a feat that defies known aerodynamics.
And that tail kind of represents the nose of the vehicle, at least as its flight path is going. And so with that, you know, we would typically see an aircraft just kind of trudging along with a straight line, taking occasional turns. But these objects had a little bit more of a, I don't want to say random, but more less controlled flight path. That velocity vector would kind of jump around a bit more. They would not proceed in like a perfectly straight line as you would imagine like a flight navigation computer would take you, right? It takes you from A to B in the straightest line possible. These objects seem to kind of be moving in a direction that was not a straight line, but generally proceeding in that direction. And so they would kind of be meandering slightly, but moving in that general direction, both three-dimensionally and horizontally.
So winding around, going up, going down.
Mm-hmm.
So they're not on a flat plane, and they're not going in a straight line.
So I don't want to draw too many firm statements like that, because we would see them being flat, too. We'd see them perfectly stationary up there, regardless of the wind.
Really?
Mm-hmm. Yep.
Wow. So what kind of wind are you talking about?
Oh, gosh. I mean, at altitude, you can have anywhere up to 100, 120 knots of airspeed.
What is that in miles per hour?
It's about 130, 140 miles an hour.
So they're completely stationary with 140 mile an hour wind?
Correct.
How would something do that?
It's confusing to me as well. Even if we had something that could just burn that much energy, right? Like if you had a sphere surrounded by little rockets, right? Just imagining something right now.
Okay.
And if you wanted to keep that perfectly stationary, right, against gravity, you could just fire all the rockets at the bottom really fast and hopefully keep it flat, right?
Right.
It's going to have tiny little variations. And then if you have wind hitting it and all this, you could potentially have those rockets try to counter it, but it would never be perfect.
When asked whether the area they were flying in was restricted airspace, Graves clarified that it was part of the North American Air Defense Identification Zone, or ADIZ, where any aircraft must identify itself before entering. Yet these objects never did. They appeared with no transponders, no acknowledgement from air traffic control, and no signs of being known aircraft, military, or civilian. Rogan pressed for further details, and Graves described the objects' bizarre flight behavior. Some performed racetrack patterns, a maneuver involving straight flight paths and 180-degree turns, often used for surveillance. Others hovered as if locked in place, impervious to wind or weather. These sightings were daily occurrences. Graves explained that although the initial assumption was radar malfunction, the consistency and corroboration from FLIR visuals ruled out such technical errors. What they saw through the infrared cameras wasn't a traditional aircraft, but it was more like a glowing source of energy, like a flashlight shining back into the camera. So this confirmed that the radar readings were not illusions, but yet something more physically present in the sky.
240 to maybe 330 knots, around there.
So somewhere in the range of an airplane.
Yeah, a fighter aircraft would be kind of flying around at those airspeeds, except sometimes they would be perfectly stationary as well.
Right. So it's not exhibiting any sort of patterns that you've recognized in the past.
No, they have actually. So, although
but with the stationary, no, right?
Correct. With the stationary, no. With the meandering kind of flight path, no. But I would also see them essentially fly what we call a racetrack pattern. And essentially what that means is they fly in a straight path, and then they do like a 180-degree turn in a certain direction, then they fly a straight path, then turn again. You know, so that's what we call a racetrack pattern as opposed to a circular holding pattern. We did witness racetrack patterns. In fact, I think there's been some cases off the West Coast just past couple weeks where people have also been observing objects flying in racetrack patterns high at altitude with lights. So I do recognize that behavior, but I don't necessarily think that means we have to attribute it to normal behavior necessarily. That type.
In one particularly alarming incident, 2 jets from Graves' squadron flew in formation when an object passed between them. The lead pilot, who visually saw the object but hadn't locked it on radar, returned visibly shaken. He described the object as a black cube suspended within a translucent sphere, with the cube's corners touching the sphere's interior. And this wasn't just a vague light in the distance. It was a geometrically distant shape, reported with precision. Interestingly, similar cube-shaped UFOs have been sighted elsewhere, from El Paso, Texas, to Missouri and Colorado. Civilians have reported and recorded sightings of similar floating cubes, some glowing, some silent, and some accompanied by humming sounds. These reoccurring appearances have sparked theories about the shape's purpose. A cube, Graves speculated, could be structurally efficient for housing tech or maintaining propulsion systems.
That happened when we visually saw one. And the first time we visually saw one, the object was directly at what we call the entry point of the area. So, you know, that box that I told you about in the sky that starts 10 miles off the coast, there's a particular GPS, location and altitude where incoming traffic will fly in, and outbound traffic will fly in the exact same spot, but will fly out 1,000 feet lower. There were 2 aircraft from my squadron, VFA 11, and they flew, took off as a flight of 2. That means they're essentially flying in a formation like this. And as they hit the area, one of these objects went right between the aircraft. The lead air crew saw the object. The Dash 2 aircraft crew did not, which is not surprising because they're usually, you're very focused on flying formation. You're just staring right at that aircraft. The lead really has actual leeway to look around. So he saw it, and, he immediately came back. I have to assume he didn't have it on his radar because he wouldn't have flown through this object at the entrance point. He turned around, flew back, landed, and I was in the ready room when he come back, and he had all his gear on, which typically is not a good thing because you want to get that stuff off as fast as possible. So usually means there's a problem of some nature, and he was just sitting there saying, "Hey, I almost hit one of those damn things." And we all knew what he was referring to, even though we didn't necessarily have a name for it, just because we were seeing these so much. And he described it. He described it just as a black or dark gray cube, and that cube was inside of a clear translucent sphere. And essentially, the apex or the corners of that cube, best he could tell, were touching that inside of that sphere.
Graves emphasized the unsettling nature of the UFO's stillness and powerful winds and their repeated presence in operational airspace. While some suggested balloons or debris, such explanations fall short. Balloons drifting near fighter jets could cause engine failure, yet none did. Moreover, these objects moved intelligently and with purpose, accelerating or holding position in ways conventional objects just simply can't. Joe Rogan shares an unsettling story with Post Malone during episode 2018 of his podcast, one that blurs the line between historical mystery and science fiction horror. He begins reading from a CIA file said to be based on original KGB materials, detailing an alleged alien encounter in the Soviet Union that led to the petrification, literally, of 23 soldiers.
For a buzzword.
What do you think about all this UFO disclosure shit? Are you paying attention to it?
Yes, sir.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's I think it's pretty cool.
That's pretty interesting, right?
Yeah.
It's interesting, like how little people seem to care.
Because we already know.
I know, but it's interesting that like there wasn't like some moment where people like were like, "Holy shit, aliens are real." There
Pretty
wasn't a
soon
moment.
that's coming.
You think? I think it's because of this slow trickle. It's going to be. We just accept it.
Well, they tried.
According to the documents, the incident took place in Siberia, where a low-flying saucer-shaped craft appeared above a Soviet military unit conducting a routine training exercise. Without warning or clear authorization, one of the soldiers launched a surface-to-air missile at the object. The missile struck its target, causing the UFO to crash nearby. From the wreckage, 5 short beings reportedly emerged. They were described as humanoids with large heads and dark, oversized eyes. The 2 surviving soldiers claimed that these figures regrouped and, in an eerie, almost ceremonial act, merged into a single sphere-shaped form. This fusion triggered an intense buzzing and hissing, which quickly escalated into a blinding white light. And within seconds, the glowing sphere expanded rapidly and exploded with a force that left 23 soldiers standing nearby turned into what appeared to be stone statues, frozen in place like ash-coated figures at Pompeii. The only reason the 2 survivors lived, the report claims, is because they were standing in the shade and were partially shielded from the blast.
Like War of the Worlds, which is like the War of the, or Battle of Los Angeles and shit like that. That was a real fucking thing that happened. The pictures of Battle Los Angeles is crazy.
What happened exactly?
There's
Battle
this,
of Los Angeles?
There's this big object in the sky, and we're shooting machine guns at it. We
What year
got
was this?
spotlights. This is like in the 50s, maybe?
There's this photo.
Look at this shit.
Wow.
So we're putting fucking
So they have
rounds on
these
this fucking thing.
Spotlights on this thing in the sky.
Look at the rounds.
Right, but what is it? What is it that they see? That's weird that all you can see is spotlights.
1947, it says in the corner.
Boy, that looks like a fucking flying saucer.
Look at
That
in
one?
the middle,
Yeah.
and look at, but those things around it, those are fucking like Ma-Deuce rounds. Like they're shooting at this fucking thing. They don't know what it is.
Well, you know that there's a famous story from the Soviet Union that these guys shot at a UFO and it turned them into stone.
Is it true?
I don't know. The CIA investigated it. Here, I'll send it to you, Jamie.
Joe Rogan and Post Malone react with a mix of awe and disbelief. The story, while terrifying, is not completely dismissed. Their acknowledgement that while no physical evidence of this specific UFO has surfaced, that doesn't automatically disprove the event. The CIA file in question, part of a larger classified 250-page dossier, has never been fully released to the public. And what Rogan reads from is merely a fragment, but even within that, the document closes on a particularly ominous note. It states that if the report is accurate, the implications are deeply disturbing. The technology used by these beings suggests capabilities that way far exceed human understanding, and most importantly, they demonstrate the ability to retaliate decisively if they're threatened. That final thought triggers another avenue of conversation between Joe and Post. Rogan raises the idea that the alien narrative might, in some cases, serve as a smokescreen, a cover for secret military projects. He speculates that some of the craft and phenomena people report could be advanced drone or aerospace technology developed in black ops programs. In other words, not all alien sightings are alien.
Document about it. That these guys supposedly shot at a low-flying spaceship. Look at it. According to the KGB materials, a quite low-flying spaceship in the shape of a saucer appeared above a military unit that was conducting routine training maneuvers. For unknown reasons, somebody unexpectedly launched a surface-to-air missile and hit the UFO. It fell to Earth not far away, and 5 short humanoids with large heads and large black eyes emerged from it. It is stated in the testimonies by the 2 soldiers who remained alive that after freeing themselves from the debris, the aliens came close together and then merged into a single object that acquired a spherical shape. That object began to buzz and hiss sharply and then became brilliant white. In a few seconds, the spheres grew much bigger and exploded by flaring up with an extremely bright light. At that very instant, 23 soldiers who had watched the phenomenon turned into stone poles.
Poles.
Yeah, only 2 soldiers who stood in the shade and were less exposed to the luminous explosion survived.
No shit.
The KGB report goes on to say that the remains of the UFO and the petrified soldiers were transferred to a secret scientific research institution near Moscow. Specialists assume that a source of energy that is still unknown to Earthlings instantly changed the structure of the soldiers' living organisms, having transformed it into a substance whose molecular composition is no different from that of limestone. Oh my God.
It turned them into limestone.
Turned them literally into limestone.
And this is a CIA paperwork?
Well, this is, they're reading from a KGB file, right? So it's just... Go to the very bottom of that again, Jamie, the very bottom of that. It says, one of the things that says, the CIA representative stated, if the KGB file corresponds to reality, this is an extremely menacing case. The aliens possess such weapons and technology that go beyond all our assumptions. They can stand up for themselves if attacked. But the thing is, they're saying if the file corresponds to reality, that means there's a question.
If this is real, they're tough.
Yeah, they can fuck with you.
What year was this released?
I don't know.
However, he doesn't dismiss the extraterrestrial possibility outright. On the contrary, he thinks it's logical to consider the possibility that we've already been visited. The idea, while lacking hard evidence, isn't as implausible when one considers the size and scale of the universe. If intelligent life exists elsewhere, the chances that they've discovered us, accidentally or intentionally, really aren't so far-fetched, are they?
Show me things. I've seen some things already, like those videos that they took off the FLIR video and the Go Fast video, and these videos of these things where these jet fighter pilots are trying to track this thing, and it's like zipping across the sky, and they're like, what the fuck is that? I've seen a few of those. I've talked to 2 different fighter pilots that have had encounters.
And they're all in.
They're all in. I think there's a real thing going on. What that real thing is what's confusing to me. I think some of it has to be ours. I think some of it has to be like super advanced drone technology that we don't want everyone knowing about, and it's probably some black ops shit. But I don't think that's all of it. I think it's also possible that we've been visited. It just makes sense. It sounds so stupid. That's part of the problem of even talking about it, because it sounds dumb. Because there's no evidence. So you have to believe in something where there's no evidence of it other than like some blurry photographs. But then when you just think about the size of the universe itself and the fact that we exist here on this planet. We're real. We know we're real.
What if it's fucking a Martha or whatever, and they're from fucking the center of the earth, and the holes in the poles or whatever, north and south, and that's where the holes are, and that's why Google Maps blocks it all out and all that shit.
Well, that would be a great theory before cell phones.
Still, the conversation circles back to the fundamental difficulty in discussing these phenomena seriously. Post Malone reflects on how the culture has been gradually desensitized to the idea of aliens through decades of films, television, and pop culture. He notes that concepts like extraterrestrial visitation, UFOs, and intelligent life beyond Earth are now so embedded in entertainment that when someone brings them up in real-life conversation, it almost feels like cliché. Despite that, he believes most people still carry a quiet certainty that something is out there, whether they admit it publicly or not. In episode 2118 of The Joe Rogan Experience, musician Patrick Carney shares eerie experiences and explores the mysterious history of UFO sightings in Ohio. Their conversation dives deep into government secrecy, alien conspiracies, and the peculiar local lore surrounding the Wright-Patterson Air Force Base, a place rumored to house alien remains.
Theories about all this UFO shit is that they're not coming from another planet. They're coming from another neighboring dimension.
Right.
And it sounds stupid, but so does sending a video on your phone to Australia. If you lived in 1956, you're like, what the fuck are you talking about? Yeah. If you pointed to a telephone and said, one day people are going to jerk off to that.
Patrick kicks off the story with a personal encounter. Driving along a quiet stretch in Ohio, he spotted an unusual craft hovering just 100 feet above the house. No fly zone, he notes. Yet the object hovered silently and with a strange light emanating from it, like a helicopter, but without any typical noise or other lights. So he rolls down the windows, and as he gets closer, and his girlfriend even turned on her old Nextel phone to call someone, the moment the screen lit up, the craft took off instantly, fast, silent, and without any warning at all.
You know, I saw something once, and it was right after 9/11, and it was weird because I'd seen this fireball kind of go through the sky like a day or two earlier. This was all during the no-fly period of time, right after 9/11. But what I saw that was, I still don't know what the fuck it was, and it was, I was driving my girlfriend from Akron she went to school at the time, she was going to Oberlin, this really liberal school out in the middle of nowhere in Ohio, and I was driving out there, and it's on the way towards the FAA headquarters, is like in Lorain or Elyria, Ohio. That's where they monitor all the flights for North America, or for the United States. And anyway, I was driving out there, and I saw this thing hovering over a house, and it was, you know, I took note because like no fly zone, you know, it was like,
right.
And it looked like a helicopter or something, like, because there was a light coming down, but no other lights, and but it was like only 100 feet above this house in the middle of nowhere, right along the same stretch of road where I'd seen this fireball a couple days earlier. And I was driving a stick shift Ford Escort, and I put it in neutral and rolled down the windows as I got closer, and there was like no sound coming from this thing. And my girlfriend had like one of those Nextel phones, the early cell phone, and she turned it on because like you should call someone, like call the police or something. This is insane. And the minute like the screen turned on, this thing just like took off. It didn't go like thousands of miles an hour, but it went really, really fast. It made no sound. It just was like, whoop. That's the only thing I've ever seen. But I still don't know what the fuck it was.
Wow.
But you see weird shit like in Ohio because there's Wright-Patterson Air Force Base there.
Yeah.
One time I was driving, we were on tour, I was driving us in right, like for the tree lines on the side of the road, and right, I'm just driving and a Harrier just like pops up. You know, those planes that can kind of just popped up like right maybe 100 yards from the road. But yeah, that's what they apparently keep the alien corpses, you know.
Yeah, that's what they supposedly flew the wreckage from Roswell, New Mexico to Wright-Patterson Air Force Base.
It's a good place to keep it because I'm from Ohio and I've never actually been into Dayton, Ohio. So just the outside of Dayton.
And this experience isn't isolated in Ohio. Joe and Patrick discuss the state's long-standing reputation as a hotspot for strange phenomena. Wright-Patterson Air Force Base near Dayton has been at the center of alien lore for decades. It's allegedly the site where debris and bodies from the infamous 1947 Roswell crash were transported and stored. Joe reflects on his own brushes with military aircraft, recalling an incident when a Harrier jet suddenly appeared just yards from the road. They both agree it's infuriating that if such discoveries exist, the public has been kept in the dark for so long. If you guys really did find a crashed UFO, how about a little heads up, Joe says. It's rude that you've had it so long, and people just go to their graves guessing.
If they do still have that there, that's really rude. You should let people see that.
Yeah.
If you guys really did find a fucking crashed UFO, how about a little heads up? It's rude. It's rude that they've had it for so long, and we've just been, people go to their grave just guessing.
Don't they say that like the recovered materials and stuff, they, in order to not have to turn it over to the public, they keep just giving it to private defense contractors.
Really?
That's who holds the material. I think that's what.
Well, I would imagine if I was the government and I had a crashed UFO, that's why I'd bring it to the private defense contractors. They're already good at keeping secrets. They already know how to make your weapons, and they know how to do stuff that you don't know how to do. They're doing it for you. Like, it's not like the fucking government themselves.
The conversation then shifts towards government handling of alien materials. Patrick suggests that instead of the government itself holding onto recovered wreckage or remains, these should be passed to private defense contractors, companies already entrusted with classified weapons projects and known for their secrecy. So Joe confirms his theory, pointing out that the government often outsources missile production and other advanced technology development to these specialized firms. And then Patrick brings up a curious local landmark, the massive Air Dock building in Akron, Ohio. Originally built in the late 1920s to construct blimps, this enormous structure is 1,175 feet long, 325 feet wide, and 211 feet tall, more than 4 times the length of a football field. The building looks like something straight out of Star Wars, tucked oddly in the middle of a residential neighborhood, with its own atmosphere that apparently lets it rain inside. Patrick believes this could be a perfect facility to conceal alien technology or secret government projects under the radar.
There's this massive building in Akron called the Air Dock. It was built in the late 20s so they could build blimps, because they used to build all the blimps in Akron.
It's incredible. Looks like Star Wars.
I mean, it's fucking nuts.
Because it's right in the middle of a neighborhood.
It rains.
Whoa.
It has its own atmosphere. It rains inside there.
Whoa.
Yeah. It's the most ominous looking structure. It's so fucking long and big. It's like,
holy shit.
Yeah.
That's so big.
And it's like right, it's like you can see it from like the whole south side of the city. But now they have like this crazy perimeter around it. It's Lockheed Martin, I think, controls it. I'm like, what the fuck are they building in there? But you can't get close to it. You can't get close at all.
What they're building there is probably minor league stuff. The stuff they build out in the middle of nowhere,
That's
in
what
the
I'm saying.
desert, carved into the mountain, that's the scary shit.
That's what I'm saying.
I think most of what people are seeing is a government aircraft.
Oh, for
Either
sure.
a drone or something.
That's why they won't even acknowledge the hypersonic missile. Like they just announced that they're like discontinuing research on the hypersonic missile when clearly they must have the, it must be fully operational.
Yeah, I would imagine they would tell us. Like, they don't have to.
Yeah,
That's
no.
one of the most incredible things about the way the government works, is that the amount of money that they get. That was the argument for the reason why this hasn't been disclosed. Like, the government doesn't want to come out and say, it was the money allocation. Like, you had to have lied to Congress about where the money was going.
Well, someone was saying like it's like the opposite of brinkmanship. Like there's weapons that exist that if other countries knew they existed, would just be such a fucking threat that it would cause a war. Just the idea that someone had something like that no other country had, that you could wield that kind of weapon. So there's like these weapons that get invented that have to remain top secret because it would just upend the whole fucking power structure.
Joe and Patrick close the segment by pondering what most so-called UFO sightings really are. Joe argues that many are likely advanced government drones or classified aircraft, explaining why the government refuses to acknowledge certain technologies, like hypersonic missiles, which they reportedly have but won't disclose publicly. Patrick agrees, adding that revealing certain weapon systems would be so threatening it could spark an international conflict. The secrecy, then, is less about hiding extraterrestrials and more about protecting national security and military advantages, right? In episode 1976 of The Joe Rogan Experience, filmmaker James Fox recounts one of the most compelling and eerie UFO encounters in American history. The 1964 Socorro incident involving police officer Lonnie Zamora.
That Tic-Tac. I was investigating a landing case in Socorro, New Mexico. It was April 24th, 1964. So I spent 5 years on this case. It was the case that turned around Dr. Jalen Hynek. Dr. Jalen Hynek investigated UFO reports for the United States Air Force as a scientific advisor from 47 to 69. He's the one that coined all the term close encounter of the first kind, close encounter of the second kind, and close encounter of the third kind. Okay? Close encounter of the first kind is when you see a UFO at close range. Close encounter of the second time, you see a UFO and somehow it interacts with the environment, whether like Richard Dreyfuss' face got burnt or it leaves marks on the ground or it burns trees or whatever. The propulsion affects something. Close encounter of the third kind, and this is coming out of Air Force Project Blue Book's own files. This is not me saying this. Close encounter of the third kind is when beings are reported by the witnesses. So beings are associated with the craft are reported. One of the best, most well-documented cases in U.S. history took place at Socorro, New Mexico, April 24th, 1964, at 5 o'clock with a police officer that was on duty by the name of Lonnie Zamora. The best case in U.S. history. The best documented case. The first military officer to arrive on the scene got there, the bushes were still smoking. I mean, the imprints in the ground of the craft, the footprints, they got diagrams of this stuff. And I spent 5 years going back and forth to Socorro, New Mexico. I got to know the wife, Mary. I got to know the daughter, Diane, the son, Michael, his co-workers. I went to the National Archives with Ray Stanford. He wrote the book on it, Socorro Saucer in a Pentagon Pantry. Phenomenal case. And what I learned was that the Air Force, according to his own family, Lonnie Zamora's family, told his daughter this. I have this on camera. The Air Force wanted him desperately not to talk about the beans. They discouraged him to talk about the beans, and I'll tell you why. It's one thing when you see an object, unknown object like David Fravor saw up in the sky, exhibiting a technology that seems to defy conventional propulsion. And it's another thing altogether when you've got beans on the ground. The Air Force didn't want him talking about that, and that was one thing that his daughter and his wife told me clearly. And his wife said, Lonnie was never the same after that.
It was April 24th, around 5 p.m., when Lonnie, while on patrol in the small town of Socorro, New Mexico, experienced something that would haunt him for the rest of his life. He was in the middle of a high-speed chase when something unusual caught his eye, something descending from the sky. Abandoning the pursuit, he followed the strange sight toward a dry arroyo, where he saw what appeared to be an overturned car. But as he got closer, it became clear this wasn't any ordinary accident. Perched in the arroyo was an egg-shaped craft, metallic and smooth, sitting on landing struts. Lonnie rolled down his car window to get a better look and saw two small figures moving near the base of the object. He described them as childlike, dressed in tight-fitting white overalls, and at one point, one of the figures turned and locked eyes with him. According to James, Lonnie's wife and daughter later confirmed he was never the same after that day. Something about that encounter unmoored him. The Air Force responded quickly, with the first officer on the scene arriving while the bushes were still smoldering. There were burn marks, landing impressions, and footprints. Photos were taken, diagrams drawn, and evidence collected. Yet, rather than encouraging transparency, the military's response was to suppress the story.
What did Lonnie see?
Lonnie saw two beans at the base of an egg-shaped craft that was landed in an arroyo in Socorro, New Mexico in broad daylight. Lonnie looked out the window of his patrol car. He saw something that caught his eye, and then this object landed. He was actually in hot pursuit at the time. He gave up pursuit to go investigate what was going on, and he sees this object in the arroyo in the desert on the ground. It's such a well-documented case. And he rolls down his car window and he's looking out and he's going, am I looking at like an overturned car? What the hell am I looking at? And then he sees two little figures. He said they were childlike at the base of the craft, and one of them locked eyes with him. And his wife said he was never the same after that. But
how did he describe them? What they
he said like? They were small, childlike, small, and had white coveralls, tight coveralls. This is a close encounter of the third kind.
What did they say their faces look like?
He didn't give a lot of detail. So I went to Lonnie's house. I got to know his wife quite well. Lonnie had passed a couple of years prior to that. And I don't know how far down the rabbit hole you want to go in this case, because we could talk on this case for 3 hours, but whatever. I could tell you that I got access to, he had this black duffel bag, and it was with his wife's permission. He had kept all the original newsprints from like the articles that had come out, and that's where I got the details. And he also talked about it in some recordings that I got from his family and other researchers. It's in the movie, The Phenomenon.
Fox explains that the Air Force did its best to silence Lonnie Zamora, warning him not to speak to the media. And despite their efforts, the case remains one of the most well-documented UFO sightings. Zamora's integrity and immediate physical evidence made it hard to dismiss. Even decades later, UFO researchers consider it as a cornerstone of credible extraterrestrial encounters. One detail that continues to baffle witnesses and experts alike is the symbol Zamora saw on the side of the craft. It was a yellow emblem. It's roughly 3 feet tall and resembling an inverted V with a horizontal line above it. He later helped officials sketch it, and that symbol remains one of the most enigmatic details of the case. As the object began to lift off, it emitted a strange blue flame that, according to Zamora, didn't scatter debris like a rocket would, but instead, the flame seemed to cut through the air and ground silently, lifting the craft effortlessly. And once airborne, about 20 feet off the ground, it went completely, totally quiet, hovering in eerie silence before completely vanishing.
That's where I got the primary description, because it was Richard T. Holder was the first military officer on the scene. The FBI got involved later, and
how long was that thing sitting out there for?
The object was sitting on the ground, not for very long, just a few minutes. Lonnie saw the beans, and he went like around to get a closer look. I mean, he was like, "What the hell am I looking at?" And he drove his car around to get a closer look, and he lost contact with for a second while he drove around to get a closer look. Now he's within 50 feet of this egg thing sitting on the ground. And he gets out of the patrol car. It starts making some weird noise, and it has a blue flame that comes out. And he said it was not like a rocket flame where it would hit the ground and dust everything up, but it pierced the ground like a knife through warm butter. And then when it got about 20 feet off the ground, it went completely silent with no flame, no nothing. You can hear a pin drop. There was a symbol on the side of the craft. It was in yellow, and it was about 3 feet tall, and it was like a V like this, 2 lines and a line on top. And
let's get a photo of that symbol that he recreated.
Yeah, you'll see fake symbols, because Richard T. Holder asked him to draw a different symbol. I actually have the original symbol. On a document from Dr. Hynek.
Why did someone ask him to draw a fake symbol?
Because he said that if anybody else claimed to see the same craft with that symbol, they would immediately be able to identify a hoaxer.
Oh, so which was the real one?
The real one is that one right there with the 2 lines in that upside down V right there. That's the real one.
That's the real one.
Yeah, and I've got the document in Dr. J.L. Hynek's own handwriting. Ray Stanford and I went to the National Archives and found it. It was a huge find.
So they did that on purpose, just in case some copycat people started coming up
with it. He
did.
Richard T. Holder, and I met Richard T. Holder's 2 kids and talked to them about it. I talked to his wife about it, and they said, yeah, he was told that's not the genuine. That's the one right there that you're looking at. That's the real one, no question. So anyway, my point is,
he drew. Is that his handwritten note over there that shows it?
Yeah, that's definitely. I actually found the original one of those. That's it. That's the document that I found with Ray Stanford at the National Archives in 2013. This is in Dr. Hynek's own handwriting. Enclosed suggests any resemblance to and he draws the symbol of Socorro. Maybe yeah. I mean, it was kind of a genius move, quite honestly.
The encounter not only startled Zamora, but left investigators completely puzzled. The physical traces, paired with the credibility of a trained police officer, turned this case into a classic example of a close encounter of the third kind. The conversation shifts in episode 2065, when Joe Rogan hosts David Grush. The topic takes a philosophical turn. They explore the theory that aliens may have played a role in the origin or evolution of humanity. Joe speculates that if extraterrestrial beings seeded life on Earth or tampered with early human DNA, then perhaps we are simply one link in a long evolutionary chain, engineered by a way more advanced species. So maybe life as we know it wasn't an accident, but a completely intentional act of biological intervention. And maybe, just maybe, we're now watching the next phase of that process unfold in ways we can't fully comprehend.
When did this all start? I mean, is this out of Roswell? Is it predate that? Like, when did they first realize that there are things that cannot be explained or can't be explained through conventional means?
Yeah, I mean, the program goes back a ways. The precise beginning of it, I can't talk about. But I did because of security stuff, but I did talk about publicly the 1933 retrieval, and I did that tactically, and I ran that through the security approval office because I wanted to show that this is much older and it's international. It's not like a U.S. thing. I mean, this stuff is landing or crashing around the world, and unexpected countries have had this happen, and that's why I picked that, because I thought that was a interesting case. And then, of course, Pope Pius XII and the Vatican were involved, back-channeling it through the OSS, which became the CIA later, to FDR, and that's how the U.S. knew something weird happened in Italy right before World War II. But
so this is 33 was the first documented.
That is the earliest one I can talk about. Yeah,
there's something that predates that.
You could infer.
Joe dives deeper, wondering aloud if there are multiple versions of them visiting us. Not just one species, not one agenda. Some may be barely more advanced than us. Others may be eons ahead. Perhaps one faction is biological, while another has already shed physical form entirely, existing in some higher dimensional plane, inaccessible to us. In that context, crashes don't necessarily disprove superiority. Maybe we're seeing scout crafts, drones, or very early models. Or maybe those crashes aren't accidents at all. Could some of them be intentional? Probes sent to interact, or even sacrifices in a larger experiment that we can't begin to understand.
Are there reports of some kind of interaction with these things where they're giving information or discussing the problems of humanity and possible solutions, or explaining why they're here?
Interactions was a sensitive subject that my interview subjects did not want to get into. I suppose that there's probably detailed documentation of those interactions that goes into a lot of the stuff you're asking. I truly don't even know the answer to a lot of that. So,
is there discussions amongst these people that there have been these sort of
there was
meetings?
Water cooler talk with some people I talked to on the program.
I love water cooler talk.
Yeah, they're like, "Hey, bro, guess what I overheard in some weird meeting?"
Right.
But that is the problem with that is it's like secondary information,
Right.
And I'm so anal retentive. Unless that person told me I had close, personal, I touched it, whatever. Like, cool. Well, you're coming to the Inspector General, or I'm gonna at least give them your name, because that's what you told me. And then obviously I did that. So those people who physically were there, were on the program, did the thing, I brought to the Inspector General.
Are there discussions of interactions with live beings?
There was some water cooler talk about that kind of thing.
That's it.
But I don't even want to get into it because it's like there were some details provided to me, but it's like it's secondary, and I don't know if that's like the telephone game, and I don't know if it was hyperbolized in any way, in the break room, so to speak. So I'm so anal about making sure what I say is accurate.
He also discusses our limited grasp of time and space, bringing up the mind-bending implication of recent findings from the James Webb Space Telescope. New data challenges previously held beliefs about the age and timeline of the universe. The Big Bang Theory, our cornerstone explanation, suddenly feels shaky in light of galaxies appearing far older than we expected.
Of simulation theory.
Yeah, simulation theory, familiar, and that is a possibility because the universe seems like a little too perfect. It's a little strange, very created to me. So just like we're in the Goldilocks zone, perfect temperature, like it's just
how about the Big Bang itself? Like, what happened? Something smaller than the head of a pin, for no known reason, becomes everything?
Yeah.
Okay.
And what's the universe expanding into?
Right.
It's like a quantum foam or whatever the heck the latest theory is that's like beyond me.
And then it perhaps just retracts back down to that infinitely small thing and then expands again.
Yeah.
And that this is an endless cycle, and that we're just so limited because of our biological limitations. Our life and death is such a small little tiny blip. It's so minuscule in terms of just the overall known life of the universe. And then you have the James Webb Telescope that's there's people that question the actual length of time that occurred between the Big Bang and now, that maybe it might be far longer. And there's people like Brian Keating that say that's not correct. It's just a lack of understanding of what we understand currently about the creation of galaxies. And that these
because obviously the length of the age of the universe keeps on getting older and older, and a lot of that's because of the Doppler shift, right? The red shift. As the galaxies are accelerating away, we can calculate what their origin point probably was and how long it took for them to speed up like that, right? So,
and only based on our current understanding.
Yes.
Which is obviously at least fairly limited in terms of what its potential is.
Well, yeah, like we still don't quite understand the origin of the moon. The moon is at the right location that causes solar and lunar eclipses. It's like the right apparent size to block out the sun. It's like super weird. Same thing with like Mars. We're not sure like what happened there, where Mars, had some probable life on it. Either a protoplanet hit it or there was some kind of impact that vaporized stuff, and like, who knows? So,
Joe points out how small and fleeting our lives are compared to cosmic time, suggesting that the very structure of reality may be cyclical, endlessly expanding and collapsing. So whether you're a skeptic or you're a believer, these encounters challenge us to rethink what we know about our own world and what might be beyond our own understanding. The stories, the evidence, and the unanswered questions remind us that the universe is far more mysterious than we often realize. If this video sparked your curiosity or got you questioning reality, make sure to like and subscribe so you don't ever miss out on any future deep dives just like this. And I want to hear from you. So what do you really think is going on? Drop your thoughts and theories or experiences in the comments below. I'm Mickey V. Have a great day.